school fans, what's up? Welcome back to the Bottom Dead Center show here on the OSMT YouTube channel, Old School Monster Trucks, bringing useless and unwanted content nearly every week to you out there in old school land. I'm your host and OSMT founder, Kyle Doyle, joined by my fellow host, legendary monster truck driver of nearly 40 monster trucks, Frank Krimmel Jr. Frank, how the hell are you, buddy?
Doing great, man. Had a great weekend this past weekend in Reading, Pennsylvania. Trucks are running good. Our team's gelling. Everything's going well. Ready for a weekend off, man. And we got a big weekend coming up, too.
Well, let's get us, we've got a big show coming up, so let's get us right into news, weather, and sports. And you'd mentioned you'd been up in Reading, Pennsylvania, riding the Reading Railroad from Monopoly, if that's not too old of a reference for anybody. I thought for the longest time as a kid it was the Reading Railroad, and I thought, how about that? Look at this game about evil capitalism encouraging reading in kids. Turns out it was Reading, but anyways, what's Reading like, and how'd the event go for you?
It was great. I mean, we had 3 big shows, had a nice display at the Works in Wisming, Pennsylvania, so great time. I mean, the Hot Wheels tour has been amazing so far. The Holmans and the Bigfoot guys have been amazing. We're really having a good time, and the trucks are running good. I mean, we had a couple hiccups first couple weeks, but now the trucks are good, and our trucks have lockers, so we do pretty well in the donut competition. I think I went about 9,000 miles an hour in my donuts this past weekend, so that's good. And
nice.
No, I mean it's going really well, and we had a great weekend. And Reading, the crowds were great. Everything was good. The Power Smashers pre-show party was good, and it's great to see all these. It's a whole different dynamic with Hot Wheels. It's so good to see all these little guys and girls coming up with their Hot Wheels toys. Tiger Shark, Mega Rex, Bone Shaker. They come up and they hold the truck up and look at the big truck, and it just blows their mind, Kyle. And it blows my mind too, because it really takes you back to when we first got interested in this business, and to see the grassroots and how it is with Hot Wheels now. It's a great feeling, and it's a great thing to be a part of. Really happy to be part of it.
I think there seems to almost be like a disconnected symbiotic relationship, if that makes sense, between what Hot Wheels is doing and maybe let's say more advanced, and I don't even mean that in a bad way, but just like more hyper competitive series like Monster Truck Throwdown, Toughest Monster Truck Tour, Monster Jam. Like Hot Wheels might actually be that skeleton key that unlocks being a fan of monster trucks for these little kids, and then they discover there's other kinds of monster truck events out there along with Hot Wheels, and it makes it more interesting for them, where maybe they're not coming in and discovering one specific brand of monster truck show that might try to make you think they're the only kind of monster truck show out there to enjoy. So it seems to be maybe a bit of a gateway to get those kids into the shows. And it's funny you mentioned that about little kids coming out there, and it's funny how when you and I were kids, there was cigarette ads and beer ads and all that kind of stuff on the floors of the arenas. And now the shows have become so much more kid friendly and family friendly in a proper way. I'm not necessarily advocating for the days of going back to where there were beer sponsors on track, although I might be. Shameless merch plug for the Kurz Extra Gold Motor Spectacular coming to Arrowhead Stadium in Kansas City tonight. So anyways, well, that's great. You had a good time out that way. We'll talk about the IndyCar side of my visit to Indianapolis recently in the second half of our show tonight while we're talking IndyCar stuff, but really just been a super busy one in the beer business for us over on this side. The company I work for, not that everybody out there wants to hear about beer stuff, but we're like hyper focused on quality. And what's actually really cool is I'm working on a special 100th anniversary logo for next year. Our company will actually be selling 100 years or celebrating 100 years of being in business in the beer distributing world. Family owned still, 4th generation. It's the same family. So what an honor that is for me on the design side of things to hopefully have a bit of a hand in creating the 100th anniversary logo for our company to use. So with that being said, we've been just trying to get everything buttoned up. We got a busy summer coming along, lots of events, beer festivals, Cheyenne Frontier Days, Laramie Jubilee Days. If you like beer and you like Western stuff, just holler at me. Come on out. Like, I'll tell you everywhere to go. I'm a rock and roll guy, man. So none of this stuff resonates with me. It's just like straight ahead, working for me, which is good because I don't get too distracted. Although I did snag some tickets to see Social Distortion down in the mountains in Colorado in July. So that's going to be like my one little breather between all this onslaught of like beer and country music stuff. Is like, I got to go listen to Social D and just drink a beer in the mountains for a night. So that'll be cool. But moving along in news, weather, and sports as we try and keep this one rolling because we got a lot to cover tonight. Monster truck topics, Frank. So we were talking a little bit about off air before we got started about Monster Jam announcing the field for the 2025 edition of Monster Jam World Finals taking place over July 4th weekend at Rice Eccles Stadium in Salt Lake City. That's in Utah, by the way. So Frank, just top of your head, and we can go into World Finals stuff closer to the time, a little more in depth. But just first impressions, real quick. Like, what are your thoughts on as a veteran Monster Jam competitor and a winner in Monster Jam competitions, a World Finals competitor? What are your thoughts off the top of your head on the trucks that have made the field, the different kind of competition structures over the 2 days, 3 days, I guess, if you count qualifying on the first day, and probably the biggest talking point of all, that crazy track that sees both lanes making huge sweeping, almost like bank turns up over part of the grandstands. What are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, I really think they got it right with the field of competitors. I mean, there's a lot of veterans in there. There's a lot of young guns in there. I think it's a pretty sweet setup what they're trying to do. And man, I just think it's going to be pretty intense. And what's even cooler is the last chance qualifiers. There's a lot of heavy hitters in that group. You got John Zimmer Sr., a bunch of guys in there that could make some noise if they get in the big show. So I really think it's going to be entertaining. I can't wait to watch it. I think it's going to be cool. The track is another wild card of the whole thing that I think is going to be amazing because, as we talked about before we got on air here, man, that's it's going to separate people. That track is going to separate people as far as the level of commitment and how fast you want to go, and if you're behind and all that kind of stuff. But man, hats off to them. They're trying something different and making those swooping turns up into the stands. It's almost like it's almost like a throwback to some of the Supercross stuff they did back in the Coliseum back in the day. So it's kind of cool. I can't wait to see how it's going to work out. I mean, obviously, it's way different than what we've been used to, and there's going to be high speeds. But I just hope the guys that are competing and girls that are competing, know that can figure out that it's like, all right, I know I'm behind, but you can't just huck it in there to that big banking turn up there. So I'm sure judgment will be the better part of the valor here, but I'm looking forward to it. I think it's going to be a real interesting show, and wouldn't surprise me the way the track is laid out if there's going to be some dark horse in the field that's going to go rounds and all of a sudden show up in the final round and be like, what? Wouldn't surprise me.
It's going to be one of those Brian Barthel style evenings where you're like, whoa, Wolverine's in the finals. I really think so, because that track, as long as it is and how they're doing it, it's kind of the door is open for mistakes. And I think if you can be clean, you don't necessarily, and I've said this for years at World Finals, even in the Las Vegas days, you don't have to be fast. You just got to be clean and not make mistakes. And I think this track is going to is going to emphasize that. I think if you're clean and don't make mistakes, as long as you get around that final turn and the other guy's not all over the place, I think you're going to be in good shape. But that's just my opinion. Well, we'll do a more detailed breakdown when the time gets a little closer, but, a couple thoughts that struck me, right off the top of my head. First off, shout out to longtime OSMT pillar and bottom dead center co-founder Cody Saucier finding himself in the Monster Jam World Finals qualifiers field. And they've got him, and I don't give a shit if it's alphabetical or if it's by truck name or color. I don't know why he's listed last in the driver cards, but I want to see that guy right up at the top, man. Like we know who we're not supposed to be biased, I guess. Nobody made that rule, but I'm going to be biased as hell. I want to see Cody charge through that field and bring himself home a win. So we'll be hoping for that. Now, with regards to the track, we so dirt usage in Monster Jam has only increased over the last 25 years, and World Finals events have been, I think, a huge contributor to that, because you can kind of run the same sort of tracks all winter long through Q1, and then you get to World Finals and you got to make everything bigger, which means more dirt no matter what you do. So as people have come to expect a certain level of performance from Monster Jam trucks and Monster Jam shows, the stadium shows and the arena shows start to incorporate more dirt, and that's just the historical trend. So now, within that trend, over the last handful of years at Monster Jam World Finals, you think about in Nashville and Orlando and things like that, they're incorporating more and more dirt into the racing side of the track. So, of course, there's a ton of dirt in freestyle, but to run these trucks up and down parts of the grandstands of these stadiums, it takes not just dirt, but, plastic and plywood and other materials to try and stabilize these racing lanes. Quite a bit of work's going to have to go into the track concept that we see, in the preview video that Monster Jam showed. So I, as a more of a racing fan than a freestyle fan, I guess you'd say, I appreciate the fact that they're investing so much in racing, and that we're not just seeing a basic like J-Hook or Cyclone style Chicago style race for racing. And then it's like, hurry up, get that out of the way so we can get to freestyle. So there seems to be still a pretty heavy emphasis on the racing competition. So I can at least appreciate that. But, tying a bow on that, to your point, an immensely talented field of challengers. They'll start qualifying. It looks like on Thursday nights, you've got your last chance qualifier qualifying, your racing bracket qualifying. They'll run the LCQ. And then on Friday, they will have the, so they'll have the initial brackets of their racing competition, followed by a 12-truck freestyle competition. And then on Saturday, they've got another racing portion. And then, as I understand it, basically the top trucks from both brackets square off to determine who the Monster Jam World Finals Racing champion is. They might even be doing a kind of like a consi round, I guess, to determine third and fourth place as well, so they kind of know who their three podium finishers are, as well as their high jump competition and the final freestyle competition. So we'll have a lot more thoughts, coming down the road in a future episode of Bottom Dead Center. There's going to be a lot to digest with what Monster Jam World Finals has going on in Salt Lake City. We kind of alluded to it earlier in our season of Bottom Dead Center that, Cody Saucier had been testing out a higher blower overdrive percentage and some different engine mapping and things like that at the arena show in Denver, Colorado back in February on his Dragon truck, just trying to help, understand what they need to do to these trucks with the EFI systems and everything to give them the power they need to put on not necessarily even a better show, but at altitude, just a proper show. At thousands of feet of altitude, like what we are up here in the Rocky Mountains, engine tuning is everything to try and squeeze all the power you can out of these trucks when you have limited air density. So if those blowers can only pack so much air into that engine, then you need to spin that blower faster, and you need to put more fuel into the motor, and you need to remap the ECU so you can, effectively combine all those ingredients more efficiently and get a little bit more power. So with that being said, Frank, we've got, you're going to have a busy summer, I take it, right? With the Hot Wheels Monster Trucks Tour. We talked about Stafford Springs. How far away is that from coming up now?
Shoot, we have, I want to say we have Baltimore after this weekend off. We have Baltimore, then a weekend off, and then we have Stafford Springs, and then I think Chicago right after that. So Stafford's right around the corner. So it's going to be pretty interesting. I'm looking forward to heading there, and obviously been there with Monster Jam in the past, and I'm looking forward to see how it's going to work out at that facility, because it's a great place. It's a beautiful track. So I'm looking forward to it. But like I said, it's going to be a interesting situation. But I'm looking forward to it.
How do you feel about maybe calling in to the show maybe once while you're out there? You might have to give us like the extra special Frank Krimmel live on the scene reporting from Stafford Springs maybe the night before.
The shows, it's 2 Saturdays and a Sunday. We'll probably be there Thursday. I could probably do something on Friday and give you a lay of the land,
Nice. That'll be fun. Well, we'll look forward to that. And then a couple things more left to touch on the monster truck things. So Hall Brothers Racing, Raminator and Rammunition, of course, they're two iconic Dodge. I'm always going to say Dodge. I know I say that. They're Ram sponsored monster trucks. They announced this week that it's always going to be Dodge, man. All my crew shirts and my fire suits still say Dodge on it. So they announced that the Rammunition name and identity would be going away after about 23 years of being on one of their chassis pretty much at all times. And that's a wild one. We can speculate, the hows and whys of it. It could have to do with the fact that the word Rammunition rhymes with the word ammunition, and we know just, sensibilities and things like that change over time. And the Halls are probably some of the most wholesome people I know, so it was never anything but a cool play on words that they and Dodge came up with. You pack your ammunition to go to the track and win type thing. And they had a truck called Executioner before that. So,
yeah.
They know how to handle these things. It's okay. So it'll be interesting to see what they come up with and what the eventual replacement for ammunition ends up being. I made all of my competition starts with Team Bigfoot. Never when I was at Hall Brothers did I compete, but I did drive Rammunition a pretty solid handful of times doing car crushes at Dodge dealer events and things like that. And it was always kind of a little bit of the stepchild to Raminator, but I think certainly over time with some of the drivers that, really excelled in that truck on track, it developed more of its own identity, pretty equal to and next to Raminator. So that's kind of cool. Dale Benier will always be the original Rammunition driver to me. There was a lot of different folks that drove, even some before him, but, Dale was kind of the guy I always think of that was running Rammunition when I was there. So best wishes to the Halls on whatever their new identity for their kind of second truck in the fleet becomes. Matt Looker not with us tonight, as you've probably noticed, but Matt's got a ton going on. He's getting ready to start taking part in his role with Monster Truck Throwdown. They had their season kickoff up in Michigan just this past weekend, and by all accounts, looked like they had a pretty excellent weekend. Frank, did you happen to see who was driving Elliot Miller's truck?
I did.
And what body it had on it?
It had the throwback to the old Perrin truck, the Bush Hog, and John Zimmer Jr. Outstanding job. I mean, every time Elliot throws a throwback body or an old school body on his trucks, he does it right, and same thing with this one. And then putting John Jr. in there, outstanding work, especially up in Michigan, because that's, the hometown for that sponsor. So just a pro move on Elliot's part, and just everything he seems to do comes out right. So I couldn't be happier with it. Yeah, I thought it was cool, especially, Jeff and Jocelyn Perrin being involved in Elliot's operation, as we all know. So just a nice, kind of a tip of the cap to them and going back to, their roots. That's pretty sweet.
I think Elliot started on the outer ring of this swirling vortex of monster truck stuff centered around Michigan and the upper Midwest. And he's like right at the nucleus of that storm now. And he's an important part of the engine that keeps that storm, churning. And I think it's awesome, man. I mean, you see where the Zimmers have come and you see where, Elliot's come, and you see all the things the Perrins did, and they continue to still have, a presence in our sport and things like that. And being somebody like myself that's not from that region, but had the good fortune of working for Elliot and working alongside Elliot at the Monster National stuff as well. Those are some of the funnest shows I've ever done. I mean, I think back, we had our guest Simpsons expert chiming in on our last episode, Andrew Pellegrini. I think about all the fun times, we had with Andrew riding shotgun with us, to all these shows, and he was learning his craft at the time as doing video work for Elliot, and Elliot's learning his craft of show producing with guys like Mike West trying to guide him along, and I'm trying to learn my craft as an announcer and just having fun with all those people. I mean, those were just such great times, and it looks like they're just doing all of that and so much more on top of that. So shout out to our friends with Monster Truck Throwdown. Keep an eye on their tour program this year. There might be a little bit of OSMT sneaking into there. We'll see how that turns out. No promises, but we'll see. So final thing I was going to touch on, just a kind of a friendly reminder. Let's say the Bigfoot team has their 50th anniversary birthday party / open house type event coming up not too long from now. I'd say about less than a month out, if I'm not mistaken, around June 7th, if I'm not mistaken, is when they're going to be having that. So that's just a couple weeks out. Folks have been asking if I'm going. I think that'd be a blast, but I will not be back there for that. I don't get to travel a whole lot during the summer. Life keeps me pretty damn busy here, but I'll be watching from afar, and I hear Jim Kramer's going to have a pretty cool hero card that he might be autographing and handing out there this year. So shout out to Jim and Julie, and keep an eye out. It looks like it's going to be a great event. So hopefully everybody out there has a good, fun, safe time. We've got some pretty serious monster truck topics that I feel like need addressed, but we're going to address those in a future episode. A couple safety related things we've seen happen recently. But we need guys like Matt Looker on the show with us as well to discuss some of those things. So we're going to hold on to those topics. Promise you lots more bottom dead center coming in the near future. Frank, did you have anything else on the news, weather, and sports side of things before we moved on to the first half of our round tire discussion?
Not really, but I just by being on tour with Eric Steinberg and the Bigfoot guys, Kellen and Cody Smith, just amazing guys, and they were telling me a few little things about this open house, and man, if you can get to the Bigfoot open house, you need to get there. I mean, it's going to be sweet, and maybe a little birdie told me there may be some special merch drops that may happen, or merch releases that may happen prior to or at the open house. So all related to Bigfoot 50. I don't work for Bigfoot. I'm not trying to spread rumors, but I'm just a Bigfoot fan. So, it's cool that what they do and the commitment that they put in to put that open house on is monumental. So if you can make it out there, I mean, I can't make it because I've got other things going on, but if you can make it, definitely go. It's definitely worth it.
The funny quick story before we dive into Round Tire Part 1. So when I was there, I had the good fortune of emceeing the open house 2 or 3 years in a row while we were still at what I always call like the Bigfoot shop, the one in North County, St. Louis, 6311. And man, that was a blast. And it was a nerve-wracking day because we're all trying to just work through the summer anyways, right? Summer's never a slow time for monster truck people. And so then, we're trying to get the whole place, spick and span and crowd-proofed. There was always a chance, or usually there was some rain of some kind. And, when you take 2,500 people or whoever had showed up and then you try and squeeze them into a shop and a showroom when the rain starts pouring down out there, it gets pretty damn packed. But we always had a pretty good time. You were always glad when the day was done, of course. But then one year, and I'm going to try and find the artwork to drop in here. It was pretty funny, but I had an apartment not too far from the shop at the time, up in Florissant, and I had a little after party there. And it's all goobers like us that were there. It was Pellegrini was there, Mike Krieger was there, Dan Wyatt, a bunch of these guys that, I've known forever, and they all like old school stuff. And I had, without begging, I had begged Kramer. I was like, dude, you gotta stop by the party. Like, people's minds are gonna go on the back wall, just like, look at all the brains, So I was like, come on, man, I'll have beer, I'll have whiskey, and of course Jim could never be plied by such, weak tactics. But yeah, he dropped in. So like, we're all camped out in my living room. We're watching the TV with old monster truck videos and stuff on it, and maybe having a few beverages and just hanging out. And he shows up and, man, crashes our party, hanging out with us. Fucking coolest thing ever, man. Like, because he knew all these guys too. But I was just like, we're all like kind of looking at each other across the room like, Jim Kramer's here, man. Like, I just poured Jim Kramer another Crown Royal. How cool is that? I'm not saying that happened. It might have. So anyways, we definitely, we called it something stupid, like, the double, triple old school Monster Truck Throwdown or something. But no doubt it was in those early days where the things that have become OSMT might have been cooked up. So anyhow, you'd had to have been there. There's incriminating photos of one member of the party passed out on the floor asleep, and we might have staged it so that person looked like they would have favored a particular videotape in a certain way. I'll just leave it at that. So, the things you do in your 20s when your childhood hero stops by to crash your party. So, okay, well, let's get to the heart of the matter here. We're just going to keep on blasting through this. So, Indianapolis, that is the core topic of this episode of Bottom Dead Center. Of course, this is May. as they say. The Indy 500 is just a few short days away. We're recording on Tuesday, May 20th. So we're trying to get this out to you between Indy 500 qualifying and, of course, the race on Sunday of Memorial Day weekend. So Frank and I, as you've probably gathered, if you've listened, we're both pretty huge open wheel racing fans, really big IndyCar fans. But we're going to talk about IndyCar in the second half of Round Tire discussion after we take our break a little later on. But right now, Frank, I kind of wanted to get into a little bit of the Monster Truck side of Indianapolis and, kind of let each other talk about what we think Indianapolis means to monster trucks. So yourself, what does Indy mean to you as a monster truck fan and as a competitor?
Well, as a fan growing up, I mean, watching the Penda stuff, as we both did, and pretty much everybody watching this did too. It's like the Indy, Penda, the fairgrounds, and the Hoosier Dome were like the crown jewel of the Penda series. And also with me personally, the first time I ever got to drive Avenger was at the Indiana State Fairgrounds. So to get my MTRA license. So Indy, even just being a race fan my entire life and watching racing and racing go-karts, junior dragsters, all the stuff I did when I was younger, Indy was it. It's like I don't care what you raced when you were a kid. As far as my generation, the Indy 500 was always it. And I've, you watched it on TV. It was like a day-long thing. You get up in the morning, the pre-race is on. Jim Neighbors is, ripping back home again in Indiana. I mean, Indy is just awesome. And I don't care what motorsport you're doing, what you're racing, what you're doing. Indy is just Indy. And I think little Al Unser Jr. said it years ago. He goes, "You don't know what Indy means." And I think there's probably no better quote in motorsports than that. And just to see the emotion of the guy who won the pole, Schwartzman this past weekend, you can't comprehend what Indy means in motorsports, and not even the 500, but just in general. So, to me, it holds a special place with me because I've seen two Indy 500s, one with my dad. And it just the feeling that Speedway gives you when you walk in, Kyle, I'm sure you've experienced it.
Oh, yeah.
It is, and don't get me wrong, we've experienced a lot of cool stuff in motorsports. And, driving a monster truck in a stadium in front of 60,000 people is amazing, right? I can't even describe it. But when you walk in Indy, you feel like when you walk in the gates, you feel there's like an aura or a rush that comes through. It's like, this is different. Yep. This is different. And it's like, I was so glad I got to experience it with my dad because he'd never been. And, he was, at the time, he was like 70 years old. He'd never been there. And I'm like, "Dad, we got to go to Indy. We got to go to Indy." So through my friends at Safety Clean and all my, my connections over the years, we made it happen with the AJ Foyt team and everything. So we made it happen. And it was a lot of fun. And I'll never forget, Kyle, like I said before, I'll never forget watching the cars come around after the final pace lap and the green flag comes down, and just the roar of the cars and the roar of the crowd is something you can't even describe. And I'll just throw it back to you because it's like you know what that is, and it's unbelievable, especially coming from what we've done for our entire lives. Indy is different.
Yep. So a couple excellent points you made, and I'll try and piggyback on a couple of those maybe in reverse order. But 350 some odd thousand people are going to be at that facility on Sunday this weekend. That's well over 250,000 people. I mean, that is only about 150,000 people shy of the entire population of the state of Wyoming where I live. We have a little over 500,000 people live here. So that would mean more than half the state of Wyoming was crammed into that piece of property where that 2.5 mile, oval is. That is incredible. And never mind, there's really cool infographics and stuff out there that show you all the different venues from around the world that can fit inside the Indy 500 track. The entire state of the Vatican, in Rome can fit inside Indy 500s, the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. All those kind of seemingly hyperbolic but somehow true things are amazing. But I was struck when we were there a couple weeks ago and we went to the brand newly redone Indianapolis Motor Speedway Museum. And so the Uber, I asked the Uber to drop us off outside. I wanted to walk under the stands and through the tunnel and up, and there was a language barrier. So next thing you know, he's dropping us off at prom at the front door, and everybody had to see what mom and dad dropped us off in for a car. But you get out. It was a slow day. I think it was a Wednesday or a Thursday. He leaves, and it's just quiet out there. It's like 3:30, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Not a lot going on. You can hear the sprinklers watering part of the immaculate golf course and stuff that's out there. And that was just striking. It just felt so powerful. It was so quiet. It was like being next to like this giant sleeping beast. And it wasn't going to wake up for a couple more weeks. And driving a monster truck now you've done a shitload more stadiums than I ever have, and I never did stadiums packed like you did. So allow me once again to humble myself at your feet, brave Sir Criminal. But driving into a stadium full of people that are stoked that you're there is what I would call exhilarating, maybe even nerve-wracking. But walking into Indianapolis Motor Speedway is breathtaking. It is humbling.
Absolutely.
Humbling is the word I would use. You have walked into the Smithsonian Museum of Auto Racing without even going into the museum yet. It's just simply that property that is such hallowed ground. I mean, it's like I would never compare it to visiting Arlington National Cemetery or the Korean War Museum or the Vietnam, museum. I've been to those, but those like you get a little wisp of what it's like to visit those simply by being at Indy, because it is a haunted place and it is a place of history and a place of great importance. Yes, a fraction of the importance of those places in Washington that I mentioned, but what I'm trying to draw is sort of that chest tightening, like, whoa, we're here, sort of, tightness of breath, because you're like, ah, dang, this place is really big and it's really nice. So I can tell you that I felt something similar at age 18 when I was, crew guy at the Halls and had only been there a few months, and we're kind of in, let's call it like the winding down years of the Jamborees, when they were still somewhat Penda-like in terms of like pretty big fields of trucks and pretty stiff competition and racing. And so we roll over to Indianapolis for the Indy Jamboree to close out the Jamboree season with, the championship fairly in the grasp of Mark Hall and Raminator, but not all the way secured. And like you said, growing up as a kid, watching the Indy Jamboree on the Penda shows and stuff, and then you're there, like there's the Pepsi Coliseum and there's the big grandstands and the huge Indy Mile, flat track around. You're like, holy shit, we're here, and that was my Indy moment, because then every year after that, you were just a little more, I don't want to say numb to it, but it just became a little bit more of a fact of life that we got to get through this weekend. But that first time, man, I mean, that first impression of that place was pretty powerful for me as a young kid being there. And I think about some of the great races we've seen there. And for some reason, for me, I always think of I remember more of like the Lima, Ohio Penda runs, or the Bloomsburg runs, or even some of the Canfield ones. And sometimes I find myself going back thinking like, how come I don't remember a lot of the Indy stuff? And I think it's, and I'm probably wrong on this, but it just feels like by that time of the season, the Bigfoot team kind of had everything pretty locked up.
You got to think too, it was always raining in Indy when they went there. Always wet. It was always in October. Towards the end of the year, it was fall in the Midwest, so you knew it was going to be, weather was hit and miss. And I think that's why Indy got like the short stick as far the fairgrounds did as far as the Penda Tour, because they run these other places in the middle of the summertime, and in the spring they didn't have to worry about the weather. But when they got to Indy, it was always that fall, cold, fallish feel. The leaves were changing, and I think that's kind of what made it not have the grab that Lima or Sedalia and all those other places had.
I think for me, and I'm not trying to sin on Indianapolis here, but I think being at Bloomsburg might have been even more powerful for me than being at Indy to some extent that first time that year. But I mean, getting to go to Indy, though, was still spectacular. And I owe Mark and Tim Hall quite a lot for just my appreciation and understanding of the Indy 500, because, whatever agreements or disagreements I've ever had about anything those guys have done or anything like that, I will tell you there's no two people that I can think of that I know personally or have ever witnessed that are more pure racers and racing fans, probably, than those guys. And their love and respect, and just their understanding of the heritage and the history and the importance of the Indy 500. I mean, literally nothing that happened at Indianapolis Motor Speedway has probably ever affected anything about the Hall brothers in terms of how they go about their business or run their operation or anything. But I mean, they really gave a damn, you know? And so as a young, impressionable kid, you're like, well, I'm going to give a damn too then, you know? And that really started it for me, because prior to moving back to the Midwest as a young adult to work for them, I really didn't have any connection to the Indy 500, which now at this point in my life, I'm getting ready to throw a big party here at the house on Sunday for it. So I'm glad things turned around for me, you know?
Oh, for sure. It's like, you know, my respect for the Indy 500 started obviously as a young kid, just being a racer. And then once I was lucky enough to meet AJ Foyt and his team in the mid-90s through Rob Grossman, former King Crunch driver, who has a storied history at the Indiana State Fairgrounds with his disastrous runs in King Crunch, where the truck fell apart multiple times. But Scott Stevens had some pretty good runs there too. But my connection to Indy 500 is through Rob Grossman and the AJ Foyt team, and you know, meeting AJ Foyt at multiple IndyCar races and being around him and just respecting, you know, and Kyle, you know, when you're younger, you don't think about this, but when you get older, you start looking back at the history of IndyCar and even NASCAR, and you start looking at it, and it's like, to do what somebody like a guy like AJ Foyt did in the 60s, 70s, it's like winning, you know, being fast at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway in a front engine roadster when there's other guys in the field with rear engine cars, and he's sitting up front. It's like, that generation of motorsport, I think that the closest thing we have now is Kyle Larson. Really, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
But like what was going on back then and how it translated into what we do now, the respect, that's like when you walk into the Speedway, to think of the names and the historic moments that have happened in that place, in the craziness over the 109 years they've been doing it. You just take all that in and you watch, you know, nowadays YouTube is the greatest thing ever to get caught up on Indy 500 history and documentaries and history of drivers and teams and you know, what Indy means to people. So like I said, when you walk through those gates and you walk in there, you look at it and you're like, you've got to be kidding me. This is amazing. And then you think of all the history and you're like, this means more than you can even imagine, you know?
It means more than just racing. You know, like, as cool of a place as Talladega is, for a stock car racing fan, it's still just Talladega. It's a really big ass dangerous racetrack that has one reasonably decent stadium country song written about it. Indy, I mean, you can know nothing about Indy as far as the Indy 500, the Speedway, race cars, anything. And if you are driving in a car and somebody goes flying past you, somebody in your car will be like, God dang, man, it's not the Indy 500. Slow down. You know, it's a commonplace household term with people, and they know what you mean. And what do you mean? You mean speed. That's so people, thankfully, and correctly associate speed with the Indy 500. I think about, from the monster truck standpoint, like you said, the Indy Jamboree was plagued by rain so many times that, you know, sometimes speed wasn't always a part of the package there. And I've certainly dealt with my share of rain at the Indy Jamborees. I still think of Lima as being more of the one that we got rained on, worse than Indy sometimes. But and I know you've been to both of those. You've been there with me at the same time when it's pissing down rain. But, you know, I think about, like you said, the Hoosier Dome. And actually, I should probably even hit pause on the Dome talk and talk about the fact the Indy Jamboree didn't always used to be at the Indiana State Fairgrounds, where it has been now for so many years, prior to 1989. So 1989 was the year of the Bigfoot family reunion in September of that year, when truly all, you know, existing Bigfoot branded trucks were in one place. What a spectacular way to kick off the move for the Four Wheel Jamboree Series to that bigger venue. Prior to that, they were at the old Marion County Fairgrounds. And I'm sure in all of your driving trips through Indy, Frank, you've passed by that on the highway off to the side and thought, man, that'd be cool to time travel back to there.
Absolutely. And, you know, jumping back to that Bigfoot family reunion, what a passing of the torch that was. Like, you know, I know we're jumping subjects here, but that was amazing watching, you know, one 2, 3, 4, and 5, and fast tracks, the Ranger, and then 8. What?
Yep. Yep.
What happened?
Yeah, you're like, wow, Bigfoot 4 sure hauled ass on that pass. Wow, 6 and 7 were pretty quick too. And then here comes this grasshopper that looks like all the other trucks, but isn't all the other trucks, and does its thing, which is, I remember it being such a big deal as a kid when we watched. I had the home video on VHS, plus my grandma had recorded the TV version that had been broadcast on whatever syndicated station. But, they're making such this big deal of Bigfoot 8 lining up with these 2 metal ramps and sending it. And as a kid, I was like, man, that's a big deal. That's wow. That's, that was cool. And I'm always playing with my little Matchbox and Hot Wheels toys, trying to replicate all that awesome action. But then I think about it as I get older, and I'm like, yeah, you'd have had to been pretty squared up to line up with those 2 metal ramps and just go hauling it inside him. Good job, Andy.
Well, then also, too,
at least he was able to look straight down at the tire instead of being centered over.
And also, too, Guy, what you got to think about, too, is like that was the first time that we'd ever seen anybody but the Bigfoot drivers drive Bigfoot trucks. They brought in Debbie Roden, Dan Patrick. It's like, wait a minute, who are these people driving? Because, social media wasn't a thing back then.
Yeah. What are they doing?
Why is Debbie Roden driving Bigfoot? Why is Dan Patrick driving Bigfoot? What? Wait a minute. So that was, they were really ahead of their time there. The way they did it was sweet. Now they had the trucks all run against each other. And I think another one, and this is probably a topic for another episode. I don't want to get too far off of the tangent, but the Battle of the Bigfoots at Nashville was one of the most amazing things ever. I really think so.
Well, we had David Morris driving an antiquated Bigfoot 3 after having whipped the world's butt in Equalizer the year before. So, sorry, sir, you'll have to start the game over.
Try here, get in this one.
Level.
Here's the keys to it.
Yeah, the air conditioning works.
You could use the vent windows on the door here. They work too.
Yeah.
But
yeah, nothing like climbing in Bigfoot 3 to find out the ashtray's full and needs dumped, right? Excuse me, but yeah. So prior to the move over to the Indiana State Fairgrounds, of course, the Marion County Fairgrounds, from the very early 80s up until 88, had hosted the trucks. And of course, on Saturday morning, so I'll make sure I got my date and time right for you here. So this coming weekend of the Indy 500 here in May of 2025, Saturday the 24th, we'll have a special, cartoons and cereal on Saturday morning. Sounds pretty good. How about some OSMT medium raw with your sugar cereal on Saturday morning? So you'll be hopefully watching this right now as it premieres on Friday night of Indy 500 weekend. And then Saturday morning, you'll have a special treat to wake up to, OSMT medium raw with footage from the final 1988 Jamboree at Marion County Fairgrounds, featuring the 48-inch tire class. I put that in heavy quotes because there was a madman from Maryland named Mike Vaughters out there with a truck on 42-inch tires, crushing cars. So the action from that's going to be awesome. So check that out on the OSMT YouTube channel. But Marion County, Frank, you think about it, all the VHS tapes and stuff we grew up as kids had Marion County Jamboree footage on it. We just maybe didn't really realize it. There was never, really good televised action or anything happening from those events. But, some of those famous mud bog runs we see on Bigfoot King of the Monster Trucks on that VHS tape. There's a lot of Marion County Fairgrounds action on the Crush This VHS tape, which all of those, can be found in some iteration on YouTube. So, Marion County was definitely not all just monster trucks. And of course, the Jamborees never were exclusively just monster trucks. But I have to say, Frank, when they moved from Marion County Fairgrounds and really opened that sucker up to the size of the Indy Fairgrounds, the state fairgrounds, that really shifted a huge focus over to the monster truck portion, I think, of the Jamboree.
Oh, it sure did. And also, you got to remember that Marion County Fairgrounds, that was a Bigfoot 6, and Kramer did that big, crazy car jump there. And that's also, too, where the Bigfoot Ranger had its amazing run with Ken Kelling. So there's a lot of history there.
Yep. Yeah, and at least on one occasion, Bigfoot 5 was dropped into the mud bog pit. And I'm sure there was absolutely no damage to any header gaskets, head gaskets, intake gaskets, or automatic transmissions in that truck while Bob was trying to slog it through
None,
the
I'm
mud.
sure. None.
Well, great talk on the fairground side of Indianapolis. And then, we both mentioned the Hoosier Dome, the RCA Dome. I don't know. I think it's always going to be the RCA Dome to me for some reason. And I don't know why. I just, and maybe it was from playing Monster Truck Madness 98 or whatever on the computer so much. And that was one of the buildings you could race in was the RCA Dome. And just thought that felt so cool. Like, yeah, I'm racing in the RCA Dome in Indy. And that first season of Monster Jam on TNN in 1999 with, Dennis Anderson and Gary Bauer sliding their trucks around in that final turn on that really cool, really tight obstacle course. I mean, I love that track, by the way. And hell, 1999 is old school enough, Frank. Like, you remember that episode of Monster Jam? I take it from 99. There was, who was there? We had Pizzo was there. I think in Predator, Don Borders had Mistress there.
Yeah, that was a stacked field. A crazy,
slightly overmatched.
Crazy field. I think, was that the same year? It was Robbie Gray and Mountaineer? Was Scott Stevens there in King Crunch? Was that Kohler?
I think in Scott Hartsock was there. Scott Hartsock was there. And Gunslinger. I don't know if Kohler was there.
I'm trying to...
we had Paul Schaefer, Monster Patrol, I think, was there as well, too. And I loved the USHRA racing courses at that time. You had roller hills and you had little doubles and moguls and things. And what I really liked is when they spun the trucks around, the 180-degree turn, which was only about as wide as like a Quad Wars racing lane and a Tough Truck racing lane. So call it a monster truck and a half, maybe two at best width. I'm just going strictly from memory here. The video will prove me wrong. But it seemed like a really tight turn. And then they had to go over a pretty decent kicker of a roller hill before they could drop the hammer and really tear off to the cars. And I think Dennis dumped number 12 in the turn there, if I'm not mistaken.
You're right. You're dead on that one.
And, you think about how much Hoosier Dome, RCA Dome footage we saw from the special events series stuff there, the producers of the Jamboree tours. So we had our, Penda events in there, which were straight line races, that definitely provided probably more excitement in the shutdown area sometimes than it did on the race course itself. But interesting to note, as far back, and the best record I can find of it, as far back as 1984, SRO Pace with U.S. Hot Rod Association had shows from time to time in Indianapolis at the Dome. And they actually, brought Bigfoot 4 on 66-inch tires, and I believe it was Bigfoot 1 or 2. I'm fuzzing out on that one, but they brought it in on 10-foot tires, which is, awesome. Probably pretty convenient for Bigfoot that they didn't have to do the tire swap that night on Bigfoot 4 like they were doing at so many events in 84 and 85. USA Motorsports visited that dome fairly frequently right up until 1998, their final year of operation before selling to SRO Pace. You want to talk? We talk like that Monster Jam track in '99 had a tight turn. How about from a driver's standpoint? And boy, you're going to cringe because you got a locker in the front of your truck. Imagine trying to run those USA Motorsports turning courses. Dome.
They were straight U-turns back then. We're talking like David Morris. Now, if you want to go back and really look at it, David Morris had that figured out, and so did Dan Patrick. Those guys had opens in the front, and they could whip it around. The good thing is on dirt, a locker truck won't kill you on dirt. Pavement, it's tough, but on dirt, it gives enough. And if you get in there with enough throttle and brake, you can break it loose and get around there. But man, the way David Morris did it on that TNN Motor Madness series was unbelievable. And how tight they made the turns. I mean, the cars were sitting next to each other, like the race lanes. They were sitting right next to each other. You'd go over them and you see the guys kick the rear steer coming over the cars and then wheel it right around, basically a U-turn, and going right back to the race lane. So to me, David Morris stands out. Well, I can't say David Morris alone, but guys like Tack, Meager, Dan Patrick, those guys are the ones that had it figured out.
Morris's truck was long and wide, but he had such a tight steering cut on it that how a truck as odd as Equalizer that had gone through so many changes over the years handled so perfectly, so well. I mean, that truck kicked butt on those tracks. And like you said, he with the open front differential, just whip her right into the turn. And that thing was so wide that it didn't want to pick up. It didn't want to do anything weird. It was like it was on rails. And, you know, the Bigfoot trucks were a shorter wheelbase. They were narrower track width. They could turn tight. But with a limited slip differential in the front and rear, you know, sometimes it works against you a little bit in the turns, especially if you can't apply a lot of throttle to try and drive through that. Kind of like what you're talking about with a locker. You know, if you can finesse it into the turn a little bit to where the front will want to open up for you a little bit and you can power through it with, you know, both your brakes and your throttle. But even then, I would challenge a contemporary monster truck or even a truck of the day back then with a locker in the front to knock down a truck like Equalizer. I mean, if you're going to run an open front differential, that is the kind of track you want to run it on. But I seem to remember Sky Hartley one of the years in Bigfoot 9 with the snakebite body. That thing was power wheeling off the start. And man, he was able to carry the nose of that truck over the main set of cars really well. And he actually did pretty good in some of the turning course stuff, if I'm remembering.
Yes, sir, correctly. You're correct. And also, too, the one that stands out in that little era of time is the we've talked about it before on previous episodes. The Firestone Wilderness truck was just so smooth, and on that whole tour, that truck stood out. How clean Meager drove it, and then I think Tack drove it at some point. But man, it was just so smooth in the turns, and even in Tacoma when they had those dumpsters in the corners, how he was able to get around those and you know, swing around and not swing the back tires off onto the dumpster part. I mean that you know, going on for what they're doing now. And what that was super technical. I mean, what they're doing now is really technical, but that was OG technical back then.
There had to be some accuracy and some control. I mean, they weren't the fastest tracks, which every time I watch video from that era of USA shows, I'm wanting more hammer down time from the trucks. You know, they're so busy tiptoeing around. But when you think about it from a driver's standpoint, you're like, man, this is like one of those construction equipment operator contests where they have to use the claw on the end of the machine to pick up a cup of tea and dip a tea bag in it. So like, it's really technical driving. And, you know, those guys were some of the greats of all time for a reason. And those shows, you know, are proof of that. As far as other Indianapolis venues go, those three are obviously the most iconic. And I guess I include Lucas Oil Stadium as kind of, you know, the natural progression after the RCA Dome had been knocked down. It's such a beautiful building compared to the RCA Dome in terms of aesthetics and modernity and things. But, you know, the inflated dome on the RCA Dome will always be king for me in Indy. I still think that's the coolest. The Gamebridge Fieldhouse, you know, just down the street from the location where the current and the former domes were. I believe Hot Wheels has or is going to visit that building here fairly soon. Are you guys on that? I believe so.
I believe we are going to be there, and I'm looking forward to it. Just like you said, though, nothing beats the echo and the sound. I mean, of the inflated dome stadium, because that takes us back to our childhood. So it's like, you know, Silver Dome for me. You know, the crack of the throttle of a monster truck in a inflated dome stadium, the thing would echo forever. It just had a sound and a feel. Like when you went home that night, you're like, man, that sound is so cool because you can't hear that anywhere else. That's all it, you know, the Silverdome has its sound. The RCA Dome has its sound. And it's like these new buildings are amazing, obviously, but they lack that historic echo and all that, you know. And Kyle, you probably remember going to shows when you were a kid. After the shows, it was the big thing of people popping the drink cups, the paper drink cups in the concourse as you're walking out. All you heard was the pop of those cups. I remember that as a kid at the Silverdome. So it's like those places will always have a place with us. But man, what they're doing now at these new buildings, especially you know, Lucas Oil Stadium and Gamebridge Fieldhouse. I mean, I'm looking forward to go just to be in Indy and be around it. You know, but still, man, there's so much history in Indy. It's hard to explain.
Well, I've done my research recently, so if you need any updated, you know, advice on where to get a bite to eat or a good watering hole in downtown Indy, just holler at me, man. I'll give you all the recommendations. I covered a little ground while I was out there for 5 days for Craft Brewers Conference. But, you know, one last thing kind of before we wrap up the first part of the show here, to your point about the sound that an inflatable dome makes. I mean, I can hear it in my ears, in my headphones right now. It's the sound of Deal Wilson and Virginia Giant in Virginia Giant in the Silver Dome in an otherwise quiet dome, just background noise, but you just hear wah, 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 in the, that reverb, that echo off the roof. I grew up going to stadium shows in Kansas City, which is an open air NFL stadium. And as you know, the crack of an alcohol V8 monster truck engine, never mind two of them at the same time in the open night air of a cold Midwest spring evening, that's got its own particular song to it as well, too. I would say, if I'm going to draw a music comparison for me, the dome sound is like listening to Jimi Hendrix play guitar, and the outdoor stadium sound is like Pete Townsend shredding on guitar. They're both shredding. They're their own animal, but we'd be screwed without both of them.
For sure. The trucks that stood out to me as a kid, and as I look back now being older, the ones that made the most noise when I was a kid at the Silver Dome were Samson, Don Maples. That thing was nasty. Geared super low, but had a ton of power. And when he got on the throttle, it would echo through the whole place. Virginia Giant, Deal Wilson, obviously. There was one more. It was Barefoot, Fred Schaefer. You could always, and he was either on or off. And I'll never forget that. Even as a little kid, I'm like, oh, my Barefoot's so loud. Like I would tell my dad that. I'm like, Barefoot's loud because he had the straight up headers coming out of the hood. And he'd unhook from the sled and he'd swing around, he'd hit the cars, and as soon as he got on it, you could hear it, and it would just reverberate through the whole place. And it just blew my mind as a kid. And that stuck with me. It's still with me now.
That's the peak goodness right there, man. I mean, that's optimal. That is peak 80s stuff right there. So, well, hey, this makes a great stopping point for us on the first half of the show. As we said, we're going to be coming back to you after just a quick break, and we're going to drop into part 2 of our round tire discussion, talking all things Indianapolis. But hey, put your spectacles on and get your notebooks out. Frank and I are about to get a little bit nerdy about the 109th running of the Indy 500 coming up after we take a short break. All right, welcome back. Bottom dead center here, season 1, episode 8. We're in the second half of the show, part 2 of our special round tire discussion tonight, centered around all things Indianapolis. Actually, it's not all things. It's only monster trucks and Indy cars tonight as far as that pertains to Indianapolis. But Frank, welcome back to the second half here. I think we had a great discussion in our first half of the show about monster trucks in Indianapolis and what that city and its venues mean to monster trucks, monster truck history. Us, sorry about that. Us is I was getting too animated here. I need to just be stiff and rigid like Ron Burgundy. In any case, Ron Burgundy, I won't be pouring scotch for myself tonight, although I have done that. But I was thinking about having a little bit of milk since we're talking Indy 500. Frank, what do you think about that, huh?
I love it. And, I grew up drinking milk. The older I got, I realized milk doesn't quite agree with me. I won't say
fair.
I won't say I'm lactose intolerant, but I'd say I'd go straight, probably skim or vitamin, vitamin D milk. Probably skim.
Vitamin D is like the good shit. That's like the whole milk, I think.
Well, when I grew up, all my parents ever bought was like 2%.
Yeah.
So that's what I grew up on. But man, the older I get, I'm like, man, I just gotta watch the milk intake. How about you, Kyle?
I don't like. All right, let's tell both sides of the story here. I could drink this whole thing. I freaking love milk. I love dairy. It treats me not too bad, other than I have more curves than a fucking Formula One racetrack. But I would pick whole milk, man. I want the full real deal. Like if I'm there, I want the whole real deal. 2% is what this is. It's what we keep in the house normally. My kids go through milk pretty quickly, as you can imagine. Anything below 2% is just water pretending to be milk. I believe Indiana resident Ron Swanson even said, "Dear skim milk, be milk or be nothing." And I freely and willingly agree with that. But my choice undoubtedly would have been whole milk. And that'll kind of kick off our Indy talk here, the fun part. Folks listening out there that are maybe a little, Indy curious, they wonder about the milk thing. And it was really just a marketing type thing that spun off of an early Indy 500 winner asking for a cold bottle of buttermilk after he had won the 500 because it was one of the only beverages that was intentionally kept under ice, under some kind of refrigeration back in the day. So he asked for a cold bottle of buttermilk, which if any of you have drank or cooked with buttermilk, I can tell you, no matter how cold it is not something that I'm about to slug back. I mean, that's the last thing. I mean, I think I might drink gasoline before I drink buttermilk on a hot day.
Yeah, it's like with these guys, when these NASCAR races and they pound a Coca-Cola, it's like, that's probably the last thing I'd want to drink after driving a race car for 500 miles,
Well, as long as Coke was sending me a $10,000 check for every time I cracked a bottle of Coke and mentioned I was part of the Coca-Cola family of drivers, then so send my check to the address listed Coke and I'll jump on board. But in any case, so the milk thing, it switched from buttermilk to regular milk because the Indiana Dairy Farmers Association, or whatever their trade group at the time was called, saw an opportunity to capitalize on something pretty unique. Instead of champagne or something like that being the victory lane drink, they found that milk is something they could make to stand out in the winner's circle, make it unique to Indianapolis. So every year, the drivers in the field of the Indy 500, of course, make their selection of what kind of milk they want to be given in victory lane should they win the Indy 500. And I'm sure there's been those health-conscious Indy drivers who aren't afraid of dying in a ball of fire at 240 miles an hour, but want nothing to do with anything above skim milk. But as I was quickly browsing the driver selections, and I'm double-checking here to make sure I didn't make a mistake, but I'm not seeing anyone selecting anything other than whole and 2%. There were 0 selections for skim. So credit to all of you in the IndyCar field. And some notable ones here. So, Frank, you and I have, and we'll talk more about him here in a bit, David Malukas, he picked whole milk, so I'm proud of that. While Elio Castroneves, 4-time winner, he picked 2% milk. So, it all depends. Maybe winners pick 2%. Our young pole sitter, Robert Schwartzman, for Prema Racing, he picked whole. So smart move, young man. I support that fully. Glad to see, people making good choices out there. Joseph Newgarden, 2-time and defending Indy 500 champion, he picked whole. So we'll see how all that works out for them. But enough dairy talk, Frank. Let's talk about the Indy 500 finally. I know you're excited. I'm excited. Qualifying was spectacular and full of drama and storylines, to say the least, over this last week. But before we get into too much of the nuts and bolts and the carbon fiber, let's say, of qualifying weekend, let's talk about the field a little bit. So we had 34 cars trying to qualify for the the standard 33 slots. So only one car was going to miss the field. And unfortunately, that also ties into our conversation about what the best looking car was. And I think you and I could both agree the best looking car might have been the one that ended up missing the field.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, Jacob Abel, there's got to be one person that misses the race, and that it was him. It's a shame because it was the 40th anniversary of the Danny Sullivan spin and win. But it is what it is, man. But I'll tell you what, Kyle, we talked about before we got on air. This Indy 500 field is as tight as you can imagine, especially with the Penske cars moving to the back. It's going to be crazy. I mean, it's going to be it's going to be an entertaining Indy 500 because there's been years where you knew who the fast guys were. They start up front. It's the first couple laps are, pretty tight. And then it turns into a parade. But I don't. This year, I think is going to be one of those wide open fields, and I think it's going to be pretty sweet. Going back to liveries, of course, the Miller High Life car was amazing, but man, I could be a homer because I'm wearing the AJ Foyt hat right now. I could be a homer, but Santino Ferrucci with the red, white, and blue, the stars and stripes for the ABC, Homes for Troops deal looks pretty amazing.
There you go. I can't disagree with you on either of those. I both think they look great. I really liked the Miller throwback. Anytime I see beer names on a car, I'm happy to see that, especially if it's a brand that, I'm affiliated with through my job. I will say, if I can pick out a couple, I love Connor Daly's AM PM convenience store.
Yes.
One, shout out Cale Putnam, OSMT member, friend of the show. He posted those in the OSMT private group, just all of us kind of bullshitting and stuff in there. And he had a great quote. He said, if you're looking for a rooting interest in the Indy 500, Connor Daly is going full Golden State Promotions. He's a boss in a rocket. So well played, Cale. Well played. I wouldn't expect anything less from you. Probably one of the most educated auto racing fans that I've encountered that also is weird like us and likes monster trucks. So shout out, Cale, there. Love that selection. I like Scott McLaughlin, Scotty Mack. I like the yellow submarine, man. I mean, the Pennzoil colors, I'm not usually really into yellow for anything, but, that thing always does it for me. I think it looks really sharp. I going down through the list, just kind of like, some of them are just kind of unremarkable to me, I guess I would say. But those look really good. But, as we talk about liveries, the McLarens have scaled back, their papaya prominence on their liveries a bit to distinguish their cars a little bit more, perhaps on track. And they're running not nearly as much orange on them here, it would seem. But what I will say is Kyle Larson's car, I mean, I'm not a Chevy guy, certainly not a huge Hendrick fan or anything like that, but I love the continuity between his Coke 600 and his Indy 500 cars. I think that's brilliant.
It's genius. Try to keep those two connected, because I think for, as much as we talk about different motorsports, I think motorsports in general need to be together. So if you can connect the Indy 500 to the Coke 600 and Kyle Larson from IndyCar to NASCAR, you need to do that. And that's what they've done with that livery. Also, another paint scheme that we haven't discussed, which, again, a little biased because I'm a huge Creed fan, is the Felix Rosenquist, number 60, starting 5th in the Creed Sirius XM car.
Can you take me faster?
I don't even know what to say. And also, I've seen on social media that the band will be on site for the Indy 500. So,
oh man,
if the Creed car wins Indy 500, can you imagine what will be playing over the PA system of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway?
the memes are going to be out of control. Like
it'll be out of hand. But I mean, that we'll get to that later on, as far as what we're talking about, as far as where guys are starting and how the starting field's going to work out. But man, the Creed car. So I'm telling you right now, my cars for the 500 are the 4 Malukas with the Clarion Technologies car with AJ Foyt, the ABC Supply, Homes for Troops, and obviously the Creed car, number 60 with Rosenquist. I'm going to be locked into those 3 the entire day.
So those are the ones you're rooting the most for, or do you also think those are where the winner's going to come out of that little group?
Well, you know what? It's kind of funny because as this week has gone on, the previous week has gone on with practice and then qualifying. Santino Ferrucci was super unhappy with his car and always had no speed. He was 34th on the speed chart going into qualifying, and then they changed his setup to get it back to what he liked for last year. All of a sudden, he's, in qualifying, he was like 10th or 12th and got bumped down to 14th or 15th, starting 15th. I mean, they found the speed. Malukas is fast. I think the 2 Foyt cars are pretty legit contenders, as long as they don't get caught up, like we talked about prior before we got on air here. If they don't get caught up in the big one, which is I think it's gonna come early. I know we're going to talk about this later, but I think the big one's probably going to come early. If the Foyt guys can avoid the big one early, I think they got a shot, because I think there's going to be a lot of good cars taken out in that big one. So we'll see, man. Like we talked about before, Indy is the most ridiculous place and thing ever. So we'll just have to see.
I mean, that's why we don't race on paper, right? Like we
Absolutely.
can bench race and they had their 8th practice session. I think it was yesterday. They've got one more coming up. They've had a lot of track time. There's a lot of data out there, but I don't think anything's conclusive at this point.
No.
In fact, the only thing that you could maybe call conclusive is how the qualifying shook out. But even then, there was controversy there. So let's kind of go back to the qualifying side of things. Obviously, practice. They had so many practice sessions, and then Saturday went into full field qualifying, and whittled it down finally to the top 12, and then to the Firestone Fast 6. So. And without, beating it up too much, going into too much depth, I think what's stunning to me is as you get into the top 12 cars, there was definitely some surprises in there. You've got a whole mix of teams in there, but your Creed car, Felix Rosenquist with Meyer Shank Racing, I mean, that's impressive as hell. And I'm going just down through the list of the top 12 right here. Pato Award with Arrow McLaren, Chevrolet powered, not a surprise to see Pato up there. But then Robert Schwartzman with Prema Racing, and Prema comes over to IndyCar for the first time this year, running the complete schedule with 2 cars. Callum Ilott, I believe, is in the other Prema. They were a Formula 2 operation. I mean, they were feeding drivers into the highest level of Formula 1 and competing, regularly for championships and things like that in Europe. So pretty shocking. I mean, they've had a penalty assessed earlier this year, I believe, for modifying a single source component from IndyCar, which was against the rules. So they had a little setback there. They've not been hyper competitive on the road courses thus far. This is the first oval race of the season. No big deal. It's Indy. Like for your first oval race, let's not go to St. Louis or Iowa first. Let's go to, or Texas or wherever. Let's go to Indy.
Yeah.
So Schwartzman comes out and performs, on his first time on an oval, just massively fast. And then you've got, from Chip Ganassi Racing, not a shock, Dixon and Palou, Alex Palou, we have to list him as the favorite to win the damn race, and then we'll talk all about who we want and think might win the race. But I mean, it almost goes without saying Palou's a favorite to win the race. You've got Takuma Sato, 2-time, I think, right? Indy 500 winner, coming back looking for a third, kind of a one-off type deal that some of these guys do where they come and just race the 500. He's racing under the Ray Hall, Letterman, Lanigan Racing, David Letterman's team. You've got your guy right there, David Malukas with AJ Foyt. And then you've got Lundgaard with McLaren again, and then Marcus Ericsson with Andretti Global. So, Frank, I don't know what your thoughts are, but as much as it was a surprise to see somebody like Schwartzman make it up into the top 12 to head to the Fast 6, I think Andretti really only having one car in there, I guess it wasn't shocking in the sense that, Colton Herta wadded up his Speedway car and had to go to a backup, but just kind of disappointing for that Andretti group all around that they didn't have but one car in that top 12.
For sure. And one thing we haven't brought up yet is that when they, these guys run all week on a certain amount of boost. Okay. So, they're getting the cars settled. And also, too, something we haven't talked about either is the hybrid system. These chassis were built a certain way that, the Dan Weldon, they call it the DW12, so they were built around a certain power plant, a certain situation balance setup. And they throw this hybrid on there. It's 100 pounds. Now these teams are scrambling to figure out how to make this work. And I think that's where a lot of these teams struggled. Like the fast team, like teams had been fast all year. Like, Graham Rahal showed, spots of being really fast and on these road courses. But then you come to Indy, it is like the complete neutralizer, like the mid-range. So I think the hybrid's a thing that these teams are struggling with. And, man, it's so hard to tell who's going to be fast on race day because, like I told you, they add that boost for qualifying day, and the speeds jump up 10 miles an hour, and then they back it right back off for the race. So it's like they got to try to figure this out, get the balance all set, the aero package and all that stuff. And man, I can't imagine what these engineers are going through trying to manage. Okay, they're trying to get their car straight for the race, but then they have to go do qualifying. They want to be fast, they want to start up front, but then they lose that boost for the race. So it's like, well, I mean, how do you almost have to figure out where you want to be. And I think, like we talked about before we got on here, I really think the teams that qualified mid-pack are the guys that you need to watch. I mean, because some of these guys threw the Hail Mary for qualifying and they were up front. I mean, I get it. There's a lot of regular season guys that run the full series that are up front too. But I think, also too with the Penske penalties, there's going to be some really fast cars in the back. So I think that's going to shuffle the whole thing up. And once you get through the first round of pit stops and any cautions that come out, I think the caution flags are going to be huge. There's so much about this race that is so wide open and so unknown. That's why like I said, I think this is one of the most wide open fields in Indy 500 recent history.
So one thing that I noticed, Frank, and you mentioned the hybrid there, one thing that I noticed was actually two things really, is the handling of the car and the power deployment were probably the two biggest areas that I saw being affected, or rather affecting the cars during the qualifying sessions. And as you said, these Dallara chassis, they're built in Indianapolis. The Dallara factory is 2 blocks from the speedway. And it's a kind of a spec chassis, like you said, especially because of things like what happened to Dan Weldon. And this chassis has been, updated and modernized to now accommodate this hybrid electric power system in there. And it's changing the balance of these cars. And they've had the hybrid system on board, through the year, but this is their first oval. And it just happens to be the highest speed oval that the cars will see all season. And it's the most dangerous oval the cars will be on all season. And oh, by the way, it's just the largest auto racing event on the planet. So no pressure there. You've not been on an oval all year. You haven't gotten to test on anything like this facility really in a meaningful way anyhow. And so the balance of the cars is off. You're seeing them a little more snappy, a little more prone to like sudden oversteer, and there's just no way to catch it. And, Larson's wadded a car up twice. Colton Hurd is wrecked. Scott McLaughlin wrecked in a practice session, doing a qualifying sim, it looked like. So this has been really hard on these teams and engineers trying to figure out how to balance these cars. And when you're doing qualifying session or simulations during a practice session, the car, as you mentioned, is fully boosted. It's trimmed out. It's as slippery as they can make it. And they get away with that because it's in clean air, right? There's no dirty air from 32 other race cars on the track. Track temperatures, while not always ideal, or at least, not ramped up like crazy, and there's not as many marbles and all these other variables that help you make a perfect run in qualifying. And then also what I was seeing was the deployment strategy teams were using for the hybrid electric assist system during qualifying. Most teams were choosing to use and deploy their battery power, and you could hear the race engineers, the crew chiefs on the radio to the driver, hold the button on the straightaway, that type of thing, and deploy that power late in the qualifying run. Of course, it's 4 consecutive laps around the speedway for your average speed, to determine your qualifying. And so they were deploying it late in these runs as the tires were starting to fall off. And, I kind of wondered, would you maybe not try and deploy it more earlier in the run while you had fresher tires and you could maybe take advantage a little more of that grip? But obviously these people are way smarter than me when it comes to IndyCar racing. And it seems like they were trying to leverage, that hybrid electric boost on the straightaways late in the run when tire fall off was starting to happen to try and kind of keep that lap average up and maybe a little more consistent across the board rather than like spiking early with 1 or 2 really fast lap times and then having significant drop off at the end. But Fox's Ghost car was really exciting to watch, and just realizing how much change these drivers are experiencing lap over lap during a qualifying session. And that hybrid is definitely I'm not the biggest fan of it right now necessarily, but I want to see how this shakes out. It certainly made qualifying interesting though.
It did. And what I noticed too, because I was trying to, sneak away like during our show and in Reading this past weekend. I was trying to duck away and watch, whatever Indy qualifying I could. I mean, just within reason, but what I noticed is that the drop off, and Kyle, you being an IndyCar guy, you know how this works. You typically the fastest laps in Indy qualifying were the first two, and then they drop off a little bit, and then the last lap is the slowest. But I noticed this year the drop off wasn't as extreme as it's been in the last couple of years. I don't know if you caught on to that too.
I think with some guys, the drop off, I mean, I guess it just speaks to how crazy different those setups can actually be on those cars, even though they seem like minor changes. Some guys I wasn't seeing a ton of drop off, and obviously they were the cars that were, qualifying in the top half of the field. But then I was really shocked at how some of the smaller teams, or maybe the teams with less data or less superior, analytics and stuff, they might come out swinging, pretty well in their first lap or two, and then the drop off seemed to be much more like stepping off of a cliff instead of a curb.
Yep.
But then there were also guys that seemed like they just didn't get the first lap right, or their warm up lap. Really, they didn't get their warm up lap right, and then their first lap suffered, and then they actually started to maybe pick up a little bit of speed, and then of course the car would naturally drop off. But that shows just how important, from the moment you start rolling on pit road to the minute you take the checkers, your qualifying run starts the minute you put that car in first gear and dump the clutch, not when you take the green for your first 4 laps.
And you could see the difference. There were some guys who would come out of pit road and they wouldn't even go down there. They'd dive right onto the track and get right above the grass and were rolling. Like there was guys that you could see that knew what they had to do, and there was a couple of them. Like Ferrucci was one of them. Malukas, obviously, but man, it's so interesting to see how this hybrid is affecting the thing. And I can't wait to see what it's going to do during the 500-mile race. It's going to be one of those things where, are you going to see failure, technical failures? Like, are there going to be engine failures or guys pulling off because, this isn't working, that's not working? So that's the wild card in the whole thing, Kyle. I really think it's like, like I said, there's so many fast cars, 2 fast cars in the back. So the Penske cars. So it wouldn't surprise me if they're in the top 10 by lap like 5. It really wouldn't surprise me if they're going to pick their way field. That's if the big one doesn't happen early. Which
I was going to say, if we get a Hoosier State yard sale to start things off, I mean,
man, I got a feeling we're and I'm not saying anything against the pole sitter or anything like that, but man, I just got that feeling of what is it? Was it 93 when it was Stan Fox and Eddie Cheever that were starting up front? There was that big wreck and it wiped out the entire front half of the field, or not wiped them out, but it hampered them enough to where they weren't going to be contenders in the rest of the race. But man, you hope that doesn't happen. But if that does, it's going to open up the whole thing ridiculously. It's already wide open, but I think if the big one happens early, I think it's going to make it completely wide open. You're going to see a Takuma Sato, you're going to see a Graham Rahal, a Santino Ferrucci, guys that have good speed in race conditions that can sustain the pace. I think those are the guys that are going to be up front. That's what's going to happen, in my opinion.
Well, I would say the disruption that happened even before the Penske controversy in qualifying, just the disruption that happened by virtue of who the Fast 12 ended up being, is going to shake up that first 3 rows. Of course, obviously the Indy 500, they start the cars 3 wide instead of the traditional 2 wide. For those out there that might not be as familiar with that procedure. But what concerns me is, so, you look at that front row like we talked about, and so you're going to have a veteran guy, starting outside P3, Pato O'Ward. Trust him completely. Fast hands, smart driver. He's restrained when he needs to be. He's aggressive only when he needs to. Like, he's a championship caliber driver that just needs a few more things to go his way, to be at that spot, namely for Alex Palou to move to Formula One, apparently. But then you've got Takuma Sato, and he certainly qualified very well, and he knows how to win this race. but he's also not a full-time IndyCar racer. So I think that puts him in a little bit of a disadvantage over these long hauls, like an Indy 500, where, your racecraft that you hone week in and week out, and your pit crew's performance, your race engineer's performance. I mean, these one-off guys are not, an all-star team necessarily of crew guys and engineers. It's additional talent that the organization's able to bring together for that run. Not saying they can't do it, just saying they don't have the continuity and the gel together sort of situation that permanent teams have. And then starting P1, of course, we have, and we're kind of spoiling the top 6 thing here, but, you've got Robert Schwartzman, the rookie, with Prema Racing sitting on the pole. And part of my concern is if he doesn't have some kind of perfect getaway, and this thing isn't able to just settle down after a couple laps and cars start to spread out and fuel strategy starts to take over, if he's not accomplishing any of that right out of the gate and gets mugged in any way at all, I worry more about him back in traffic, because they've practiced in mostly clean air. They've qualified in clean air. He's starting the race in clean air. Depending on their setup, that car could handle awful in the wake of all these cars trying to swarm around him. And, when you're a rookie in the field, the guys in the next row behind you, which just happen to be 3 really veteran IndyCar racers, including, 7-time champion Scott Dixon with Chip Ganassi Racing. We know their cars are fast. Pelot's on the second row. Your boy Rosenquist with the Creed car, he's on the second row. And, we saw him do great things when he was with McLaren, and he's definitely punching above his weight with Meyer Shanks. So, I mean, you've got some pipe-hitting dudes behind you that are trying to run you right out of the way. So that could, if what I worry though is if somebody causes a wreck, the only 2 safe places to be are way towards the back where you've got time to stop or evade the chaos, or you better be right out in front of it. And it does concern me a little that you could see a Schwartzman or a Sato possibly getting mugged by some of these, more higher caliber or more consistent IndyCar drivers. And, maybe it's not even something of their own doing, but their car just handles so poorly in the dirty air, or they make one small handling mistake, and that could be all it takes to set off that big one, Talladega style.
For sure. And what we could actually hope for as race fans is that Sportsman gets off to he actually jumps the start, you know what I'm saying? Not like illegally, but if he jumps, starts, and
gets the jump on the field,
gets out, I think he'll be fine. But if he lays back, I think those pit bulls behind him. I mean, we're talking because right behind him is like rows 2, 3, 4, 5. Those guys are going to be ready to pounce.
Yeah.
So it's like if he delays at all at the start, he's going to get engulfed in a fury of IndyCar veteran guys and full season guys. And I think if that happens, then it's all out the window. I mean, it's if he gets engulfed and then he's back, if he's not leading the first lap, yeah. So then it's going to turn into a regular IndyCar race. But if he can get the jump a little bit and get out, if he can actually pace the field, but like you said earlier, I think, who is it, Pelot on the outside of row 1?
Yeah, he'll be on the outside of row 2. Pato Award's on the outside.
Pato Award, okay. Award's on the outside of row 1. So he could end up being your pole sitter. If Schwartzman doesn't do what we want him to do, I think Award will be the guy who will when they get rolling. He knows he's done the 500 enough times. He knows how to roll.
Oh, yeah. Awards, I think he's finished runner up once or twice. So.
Yes. So I think he could be your de facto pole sitter by lap 1. So if Sportsman doesn't get off to a good start, I think Award is going to be the guy. He'll come down and he'll be pacing the field if Schwartzman doesn't get off to a good start. I mean, that's just my opinion. But
well, I think in the reality of it starts to become, too, that, like you said, you use the phrase, a Hail Mary attempt, and a lot of the cars qualifying, I would say, through some pretty big Hail Mary attempts to land where they did, and that's what they have to do, given their team sizes and budgets and things like that. Obviously, that has to be what Prema did. I don't think they natively have that kind of natural pace that we would normally only see out of Ganassi's and McLarens and Penske cars and things like that. Especially not an inexperienced driver. It was just magic that happened, and I'm not taking anything away from it. But even if he was leading the race into the first, cycle of pit stops, I still have a hard time thinking that he's realistically going to come off with the effective lead off pit road. There's just the depth of your team is so important in IndyCar, as it is in any kind of team sport. But I mean, in IndyCar, in these kind of pressure situations, especially, everything's just got to go right. And it seems like there's a lot of time to make up mistakes and things like that. And to be sure, things can happen. But I mean, the likelihood of Prema being able to execute a perfect race on the day, it's not impossible, but it's going to be a mozzarella stretch.
Yeah, and also there's too many good teams that run week to week to week. It's like once you get through the butterflies of the green flag in the first couple laps. Once you get through that, all these guys settle in and do what they do every week. And it's going to be the same way at the 500. I mean, it is the 500. Everybody knows that. But I think once they get past the initial, if they can get through the first two laps without an incident, I think then it'll settle in. And then the big timers, the ballers are going to start weeding their way through the pack. And I think guys that had pace in the last week of practice after pole day, I think, or the last day of practice, and the guys that had speed prior to qualifying, I think those guys are going to start surfacing to the front. So I think it's going to, like I said, though, Kyle, you just have to watch it because it's like, it's the greatest race in the world. It's a great, I don't even want to call it a race. It's the greatest motorsport spectacle in the world. That's why. Yeah. That's why Buzz Calkins won it. Or not Buzz Calkins. That's why Buddy Lazier won it. That's why all these guys, Buddy Rice, that's why all these guys who shouldn't have even been in the top 10 won it because of strategy and pit stops and wrecks and cautions. That's why I think, like I said, hats off to Schwartzman for setting on the pole. But man, there's so many good drivers and full-time teams are in the middle to back of this pack that I think as the race wears on, it's just attrition is going to become something. And I think, man, these full-time teams are just going to rise to the front. And I think it's going to be a shootout towards the end. I really do. Well,
the attrition makes me nervous in terms of the hybrid's reliability. Honda and Chevrolet both have a pretty proven product in terms of their internal combustion engine. The turbocharged V6 that these cars rely on for their traditional source of power. And the hybrid has, I don't know that it's had any glaring reliability issues necessarily, but also this is a test unlike anything else. And, the harvesting of energy and stuff is going to be interesting to me when they're able to and choose to do that sort of thing, how they go about it. Heat inevitably has to play some kind of role in all of this. So that'll be interesting. But let's talk about, so we've kind of laid out some thoughts on qualifying and kind of how things might shake down, but let's talk about why two of the three Penske cars, one of which is two-time and defending Indy 500 champion Joseph Newgarden, the other Australia's Will Power, are at the back of the field, but why their teammate Scott McLaughlin is still in P12 despite not even being able to run during qualifying for the Fast 12, trying to get to the Fast 6. And really, it starts with the practice session that happened before, rather, I guess you would say between qualifying sessions, right? Because the cars have their, day one of qualifications, and then they actually have a practice session before the top 12 qualify to try to get into the top 6 on that final Sunday. And during that practice 7, McLaughlin lost the car in one of the turns and had a massive shunt into the wall. The car was, it was in every direction except straight at some point. Not for the first time. We're thanking our lucky stars that these cars have a halo and an aero screen, protective package over the driver, because I think we'd have some pretty sad topics to talk about just this, month of May alone if it wasn't for the halo bar. So McLaughlin crashes. Almost instantly, the Penske team determines he's going to have to go to a backup car. So there's literally no time for him to even try and run in the Fast 12 to then later get to the Firestone Fast 6. But then with tech inspection underway and the cars being rolled to the grid to begin qualifying to set the top 12 times, the Penske cars of Newgarden and Power are pulled out of line by the tech officials. As I understand it, Power's car had already gone through tech, passed, and rolled out towards the grid to qualify, where Newgarden's car was undergoing, its tech inspection, and they had decided that IndyCar's tech officials had decided they saw something that they didn't like and they felt was not by the rules on Newgarden's car. And it's pretty standard procedure in IndyCar for the tech officials to immediately want to examine the team cars of any car that they are finding a discrepancy on, let's say. So obviously the 3 car of McLaughlin was not on the grid because they were, rebuilding, but they did look at the piece in question, which I'll get into in a second. They looked at the piece off the wrecked car and found that piece would have been in compliance. But the pieces in question, and they're called attenuators, and I'll explain that here in a second. The attenuators on Newgarden and Power's car were deemed to be not in compliance with IndyCar's regulations regarding modification of the parts. So I'll do my best to illustrate it for you guys at home on the screen while we're talking here. But essentially what the attenuator is, it's a multifunction piece of carbon fiber that sort of forms what I call like a frog's tail or a tadpole tail. When you see a young frog that still has a little bit of a tail left, it's like a little snub tail on the back of the car underneath the wing. And what the job of this part is, aside from being a housing for the rain light, which is not really a big heavy duty job, but really the job of the attenuator is to attenuate the forces of a tail on impact into the wall from these Indy cars. And they've had them for a number of years. It is a part manufactured by Dallara, the chassis manufacturer. The teams do not manufacture these parts in-house. They're essentially a single source component. And by all data I was able to find, they do a pretty substantially good job at mitigating, some of the G-force load that the driver might experience or the shock through the chassis tub of the car when the car gets backed into the wall, which is certainly not uncommon on oval races to see things like that. So where this came to be an issue, and I cannot believe I was standing next to, just a couple weeks ago at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway Museum, I'm standing next to Newgarden's car that won the 500 last year, and I remember looking at that piece on this car, and I had no sort of inkling whatsoever that there was anything quote unquote wrong with it. And I'll tell you in a minute while I'm putting heavy quotes on there. But I remember looking at it, and I had just looked at one of Colton Herta's cars earlier in the week at a different place in Indy, and I had noticed the carbon fiber bodywork at the tail of the car, which I didn't even know was called an attenuator, honestly, was a lot more unfinished, I would say. So I looked at the Penske one in the museum, and I thought, man, that's the Penske way right there. Like, that's the Penske way. I mean, every detail is covered to the nines. Everything is nice. It's polished. It's coated. It's, it's wrapped or it's clear. Like, there's no rough edges on a Penske car. Well, as it turns out, there are supposed to be rough edges on a Penske car. And the problem comes with alterations to the attenuator that IndyCar and Dallara delivered to the teams, in the months prior to this Indy 500. And they were just extra modifications to make the attenuators function better in the event of a crash or things like that. And what it basically involved was gluing or laminating additional
joined
pieces.
them. They filled them to join the two pieces that are supposed to be not connected.
Well, these pieces were glued down to the attenuator, but then what Penske did is where these seams were, they had filled them and smoothed them. And I'm crediting motorsport.com writer, I gotta get his name
Marshall Pruitt, racer from Racer Magazine. Marshall Pruitt was the one who on YouTube posted he was walking through the museum and he saw the same car you saw.
I saw that, yep.
And he saw the same thing that was on the cars that were penalized. Yeah.
Well, and that's pretty. So that starts to make this mystery even more multi-layered because the evidence against Penske, if you want to look at it that way, is sitting right in the museum over there, right,
Yeah.
unchanged. But crediting motorsport.com writer Bozy Todorovic, put out a pretty interesting piece on motorsport.com today and broke down, with technical drawings provided by IndyCar and Dallara, how the attenuator is designed and looks and everything like that. And they apparently have an unnamed source at Penske that's not authorized to actually speak on the record. And they said that leadership was, and I'm paraphrasing right here, I'm not going to read the whole article to you. However, I'll link it in the description or something so you guys can take a look at it. But essentially, somebody in Penske's technical leadership was not happy with how rough and unfinished these parts looked, and so they directed them to smooth those edges off and to clean it up, basically. Which, I mean, you have to say from an outside point of view, that kind of fits the Penske way of wanting to have your stuff buttoned up and looking smooth and looking right. And so then the next question is, well, how is it not cheating? They're modifying a spec part that they're not supposed to touch. Well, I think that part's not, you can't deny that. However, it has been documented in wind tunnel testing that there's not really a linear airflow over the attenuator. So sealing this off is more of an aesthetic and not a performance gaining thing. And additional proof of that would be in the fact that Penske cars, going back as people have been looking at photos and video and stuff, Penske cars have been running these modified attenuators on the back of their cars, even in, last year. I mean, look, the winning car from the 500 passed Tech. It's been sitting on, I mean, if there was intentional desire to cheat for some kind of performance gain, well, you wouldn't leave it sitting on the car in the museum. You would definitely take that off and, bury it in a lab somewhere in Mooresville.
Yeah.
So the big problem here that Penske has on their hands is the optics are just like anything in American society. We focus on one part of the story and then we overblow that and maybe don't consider the whole story. So did Penske deserve to be penalized for breach of the rule of modifying that single source component? Well, that you can't argue that. Now, can you argue that they were penalized too harshly to send them to the back of the field? You could argue that, and this author I cited from Motorsport offers some pretty compelling arguments that the penalty is actually too harsh for the crime. That being said, IndyCar has a great deal of autonomy with its officials to dish out penalties as they see fit. So set that part aside now too. Here's what I think is the most glaring part of this whole issue is the fact that somebody in the technical department at Penske didn't stop and realize or didn't know or whatever the case was that they shouldn't be doing this, because that is a little bit of a red flag. I feel like on the technical side, you should know, like, hey man, as much as I want to smooth that baby out and make it look good, we can't do that. It's against the rules. But they did it. Okay, fine. But they've been doing it for a year or more now, and it's been passing IndyCar tech at all of these races. I mean, that's the monster truck equivalent of, well, this isn't really a safety issue, but let's just say in terms of obviousness, this is the monster truck equivalent of running a stock turbo 400 transmission with no shield and no blanket, and everyone going, I kind of thought that didn't look like a power glide. Mm-hmm. So the fact that it wasn't until just now that anyone at IndyCar latched onto this, right, that like is the most glaring thing to me.
It's right. It's like you run for 10 weeks and it's pass, and you get somewhere to go, oh, this isn't any good. I go, what about last week? What about the last 9 weeks before that? Now all of a sudden it's a problem. It's like, that's the frustrating part of the whole thing. And, as far as the whole Penske thing, it's like, I get it, because I saw the video from Marshall Pruitt on Racer Magazine, Racer.com. It's like, all they're trying to, you could see, Kyle, you probably saw it, you could see the little seam where they put the filler in to kind of straighten it up. But it's like, is it really competitive advantage? I'm not smart enough to know that. And I don't think you are either. So it's like,
I'm not.
I don't know how much air passes
Not
over
going
that.
strictly off information and data that I've been able to collate over the
Yeah,
last few
yeah,
days. And so we're only as smart as the information we're given. Now,
right,
looking
right.
at this like my brain does from a marketing standpoint or like a PR standpoint, it's unfortunate because it's definitely, it's not good. It doesn't look good. And when Roger Penske owns the series and the venue and 3 of the cars in the series, anything, I feel like Doug Bowles, president of IndyCar, I mean, what else can he do except bring the hammer down just about as hard as you can? I mean, I don't think you can realistically remove those 2 cars from the
No,
field. I just don't think you can do that. If you're Jacob Abel right now and you're the only guy outside looking in,
you're
you might be
like,
saying, yeah, you can. But I really don't think you can. I don't think that's healthy for
no.
the sport. It's not healthy for any of it. But I think this is an opportunity. Some of the other teams are, I watched Chip Ganassi's interview with Kevin Harvick on the Happy Hour podcast. And, Chip was pretty even keel for the most part, but I think they start to get a little bit heavy handed in trying to, nudge that, this is some kind of a cheating type thing where maybe, and this is pure speculation, but maybe it's more a little of like, hey, you guys own this place and you own these cars. Like, you can't just do whatever you want just because it looks good on the car, whether it helps it go faster or not. I don't know. Maybe that's
Well,
part of what I'm hearing.
and I heard too today by listening to IndyCar radio on Sirius XM. It's Alex Below said, he goes, they don't need to do that. They're so powerful. The drivers are so talented. The equipment's so good. They don't need to do that, even though they're trying to do it for aesthetics or whatever. But like Polo said, he goes, they don't need to be doing that stuff. They're fast enough. But Kyle, what this does do is put 2 really fast cars in the back of the pack.
Yep.
And all that's going to do, and now we can go conspiracy theory all we want. All that's going to do is put 2 really fast cars in the back, and it's going to mix the field up like nobody's, because I guarantee those guys are going to charge the field.
Right.
So all that's going to do is make the race more exciting. And like I said, no conspiracy theory here, but putting those 2 in the back instead of starting, 12th and 13th or whatever, it's going to make for a better storyline. And who knows what IndyCar's after on this, but I think them starting at the tail end is way better than them not being in the race.
I think the saddest thing of it is Penske's technical department probably could have just approached IndyCar, with their proposal to clean this thing up a little bit. We want our race cars to look sleek, and we want them to look fast, and we want them to not look, cobbled together. And I'm not saying the Dallara, choppy. We don't, and I'm not saying the Dallara ones look like that. But what I'm saying is, in terms of making parts from scratch with carbon fiber, unless you finish them and seal them or clear coat them or whatever it is you do to make them shiny and look real nice, then they look like a race car part that just isn't shiny and nice looking. Well, when you have open wheel race cars that have so much of their anatomy exposed, I think it's just a big part of the Penske way. That's just my opinion. I have no one else helping me understand this right now. There's people I could reach out to, but I don't want to do that. I just want to try and figure this out as a fan myself, based on what my thoughts are. So they definitely should have approached IndyCar on that. I think in some extents, though, Frank, like, what choice did IndyCar have except to bring the hammer down really heavy? Because if you do anything but that, then I think that's when the real conspiracy stuff fires up, and it's like, how much did Roger pay to keep his cars in the top 12? It's like, look, man, you got 3 teeth, and I saw you kissing your sister yesterday at the Dairy Queen. You don't have an opinion on this.
Well, and also, too, Kyle, just like you said, I mean, they had to drop the hammer, but also, too, we live here and we know what this event is, but to me, like, we've talked about this, is that Sunday is like a motorsports. It's like a motorsports holiday. Memorial Day Sunday is, you got Monaco, Indy, in Charlotte. Yep. So the Indy 500, obviously the crown jewel of that for us domestically. But if you think about it, the Indy 500 is a global event. So if they don't drop the hammer on a premier team that is trying to dance around some rule and trying to, they have to keep the legitimacy what it needs to be for a global event, because the Indy 500 is a global event. I don't care what anybody says, it is. It's bigger than the Coke 600. Monaco, you can say F1, that is what it is. But the Indy 500, there's a reason it's on in the middle of the day, and the Coke 600 is at night. There's a reason for that, because the motorsports world knows the Indy 500 is the only race that matters on this weekend. You just know it. You can dance around it all you want, but like I said, it's a global thing, and they had to drop the hammer. If they went light on them, because then that, like you said, it'll start the whole conspiracy thing about Penske owns Speedway, he owns the series. If his cars get, if they look the other way and his cars just get brushed back in, it's going to be a terrible look for not even just like, American motorsports, but for like motorsports internationally. It's got a really bad look if they do it that way. They had to do what they did.
Well, we like here in the States, especially, I would say because of stock car racing more than anything, we all know and love the phrase, everybody cheats, but only losers get caught. Or, if you ain't cheating, you ain't trying hard enough. And a lot of that, is fine to apply to stock car racing. And I love the stories that you hear old timers open up about, dropping buckshot out of, the frame rails onto the track to lighten the car up, or a radio that was actually lead, in the car during tech to put weight in, or helmets that weighed 40 pounds that you could never wear on your head, that kind of stuff.
It's great. It's great.
That's kind of what I like stock car racing for back then, is that kind of stuff. Whereas, things like IndyCar and Formula One, I just feel like there's not a lot of room for that kind of stuff at this level where we're going at these speeds, and the cars are so expensive, and the prestigiousness of the races. I mean, if a cheating scandal erupts in NASCAR at Texas Motor Speedway, it's news, but it's not earth-shattering news. If something, like this or really worse than this happens at Indy or Monaco or something, then that could be potentially a little more earth-shattering, and it's just so much about the prestige. At the end of the day, as I've gotten older, I've learned sometimes you just have to understand crappy situations happen, and all you can do is just try and navigate them and then move on. And I think for Penske and IndyCar both, this is that kind of a thing. There's, at this point, like, you can blame who you want to blame. The penalties are assigned. You kind of have to move on from it. But if I'm a tech inspector for IndyCar, I am definitely finding I have some explaining to do for not noticing this stuff if it hit the track multiple times last year and this year, and on road courses. I mean, if there was a massive aero advantage to having these things on the car, they would not have had them on they wouldn't have had them on at Tampa, St. Pete, because the likelihood of getting into wrecks there is much higher. Certainly getting, backed into a wall or rear-ended by another car. So why wouldn't you just throw the rough fitted ones on there? Because if you got these nice ones that you quote unquote cheat at the speedways with, then you would have never even rolled those parts out until this month in Indy. So to me, whether it was an oversight on Penske's part for not recognizing they shouldn't be modifying that part, hey, that's fine. Like, I got no problem talking to you about that, and I don't think that's wrong to look at it that way. But I come back to IndyCar. I mean, if it's like an umpire just discovering that they've been calling these balls strikes repeatedly, and that they just realize there is in fact a strike zone.
Well, see, that's the thing, Kyle. It's like, you can't, obviously no inside information on this, so I don't know, but I'm just thinking, you got to think Penske, the way they are, the way that operation is, and how elite they are. You can't tell me they didn't know there was some kind of advantage with that. I'm just, they have access to wind tunnels and kind of, mapping and all that kind of stuff, and models and all that. You can't tell me somebody didn't say, you know what? If we run this and we clean this up a little bit, we'll get like an eighth of this out of this with the air coming off here. I'm telling you, man, I could be wrong. Maybe they just want to keep things clean and looking good, but man, for them to do it, and to be on the Indy 500 winning car from last year.
It was on the pole car last year too. It was on Scotty Mac's car that won pole.
It's like,
I'm looking at a blown up and enhanced image of it right here, and
there is something to it.
It just looks so satisfyingly clean. Like, I think they should change the rule and make Dallara make it look like that. Like, that's fine. Leave the penalties in place for now, it's so like I've never even tried marijuana in my whole life, but to me, it's like just legalize weed. Like that's fine. That guy had to do a little bit of jail time because he was selling some crappy dope, but now it's legal, so let him out of jail, move on with life. It is what it is, you know.
Yeah.
Is there? I would be really interested to see in the coming days and weeks if IndyCar is able to prove if there was any performance advantage. It's just the whole they've been on there for so long and they've been on road courses. And it's just having worked for, a couple really meticulous race teams, especially the Halls. I feel like I have a little bit of understanding of what that strange ADHD mentality might be to like, no, that looks like crap. Let's clean that up. I mean, it's just as I could just as easily hear Mark Hall telling me, round the corners off on that engine side shield plate you just cut. It looks like shit. Clean it up, So, I mean, whatever the case is now, like I said, we move all that behind us, but boy, is that going to make it interesting. So McLaughlin keeps his P12 sort of default qualifying spot because he backed his car in the wall in practice, never got to run during the 12-car session to compete for the top 6. His car did not have the illegal part on it, as it were, so he's okay holding on to his P12 position, but Newgarden and Power, of course, are sitting now in the rear of the field at 32nd and 33rd, so like you said, Frank, I mean, there's a couple other fast cars that are further back in the field probably than we think they should be, but those two guys riding herd on the back of the cattle train here, man, they got a chip on their shoulder, and I think those guys are going to be charging hard towards the front. If I can guess anything about Penske, is it's going to be a hell of a team effort to try and get both cars up closer to the front before they actually cut them loose to really race each other hard.
Absolutely, and you look at the speed chart from the final practice they did on Monday, and I'm telling you, man, there's a lot of speed it's a very tight field of cars. Once they got rid of that extra boost for qualifying, now your guys are getting down into race trim and trying to get that figured out. Man, I'm telling you, it's wide open. I mean, you look at the speed charts, and of course, the Penske cars were fast, obviously, but you look around the last chart of practice speeds, and I'm telling you, a lot of fast cars, a lot of consistent cars, and that's one thing you got to look at too. I looked at that after qualifying. Is we talked about the drop off and all that stuff. Man, there were some guys that were super consistent. Like their 4-lap average would just drop off a touch, but they'd be fast first lap, slow down a little bit, and then get faster the third lap, and be like right in the middle on the fourth. I'm telling you, there's a lot of guys that have their package figured out. I mean, they've got their aero figured, they got the balance figured out. I think the race is going to be amazing. I can't wait. I'm actually counting down the. I got a lot of stuff to do before then, but I'm counting down. I cannot wait. And Kyle, you're probably just like me. I am going to be fired up on Sunday morning to get up and watch Monaco, and then go right into Indy, have the smoker going, have wings and everything going, the food all ready, because you are straight up ready for a marathon motorsports day. It's amazing.
I am so ready to put the work in. I mean, when I say it's motorsports Christmas around here, it most definitely is. I mean, we're pumped. We got flags ready to fly. The smoker's primed and ready. We got some good Harding Ranch beef going in the smoker. I do a really nice chorizo queso dip in the smoker. We got some wings going in. We got street corn, all the good stuff. Lots of good beer. A good group of people coming over here. We might be the only group of people in Cheyenne that really watches this stuff, for all I know. But you'll know where to find us, man. And we tailgate off the garage at the front of the house too, man. Like my garage bar is where it's at. We got 2 TVs set up in there, and I'll drop some pictures over to you on Sunday of the setup, and I'll share them on the show if I'm not too embarrassed at how much of a goofball we look like tailgating out here. But man, we do it right, if I do say so. But I think it's going to be a massively interesting race. And I do very briefly before we close out, we'll talk just a quick piece on Monaco and Charlotte, because we can't ignore those completely either. But, there's no telling what teams are doing, to your point on this last practice session from Monday. Track conditions are different, and what are their setups, and what are they trying to accomplish? I look at Scott McLaughlin, he's qualified 12th, but he was, damn near at the bottom of the speed charts, 221 miles an hour, best lap time of 40.62. and that was over like 65 laps. So to me, that seems like they're trying to break in and install that road course car, or that backup car rather, that they had to adapt to now be his primary race car. But then you look back up, total role reversal, Will Power in 7th, Joseph Newgarden in 8th, so top 10 speed there. Nolan Siegel showing good speed with Arrow McLaren moving up the ranks. Dreyer Reinbold Racing, Ryan Hunter-Reay and Jack Harvey 4th and 5th on the speed charts. And there's that pesky Takuma Sato. He just won't go away. He's at the top of all these lists. But then, not very surprising, Elio Castroneves and Alex Palou in P2 and P1 respectively. Palou scares me, man. Like, let's talk about the boogeyman under their bed that all IndyCar drivers are looking for before they go to sleep right now, and that's Alex Palou.
You know, it's kind of funny because the last kind of run I think about of a driver like this is almost like going way back to like the Zanardi days. Like that's the land that Jacques Villeneuve. That's the last time we saw, like, you know, Alex Zanardi and Jacques Villeneuve. That's the last time we saw a run like this. You know, it's like it's historic, and you want to see it keep going, but also you want to see who's going to be the guy to step in and kind of shake it up. You know, and
if he hadn't won, I mean, what's IndyCar raced this year? 4 or 5 races so far, and Palou's won 9 of them. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
So, I mean, if he hadn't won so much this year, then maybe I wouldn't feel as negatively towards the idea of him winning the 500 and getting his first Indy 500. I mean, he's a multi-time champion. A 500 win should be and likely will be at some point on his resume. But, you know, I have a hard time in my back pocket not wanting to see Elio pull something out. Could you imagine a 5-time?
It would be. Man. It'd be amazing. And if you told me before the season started that the only 2 guys to win races prior to the Indy 500 were Kyle Kirkwood and Palou, I'd be like, what? No. It's like this. The full-time series, the full-time drivers. The field is so stacked. You got Scott Dixon, all these guys, all these hard hitters. But Palou's he's made it look easy. Like I said, you go back to the days of Zanardi and you know, like Gilles DeFerrin, and it's like that's the last time we saw that kind of stuff. But you know, it's one of those things. It's like he's ran so well, but you know, Indy 500 is the great equalizer, and I really think, you know, as much as I would love to see Helio or somebody win that, you know, win his 5th, or you know, or even you know, Newgarden, who's won 2 in a row. It's like, to see him win a 3rd would be amazing. But man, you still pull for some of those guys that haven't won a race yet, because what better stage to win your first IndyCar race than the Indy 500?
Yep.
So it's like you look at that, but
I mean, look at Marcus Ericsson. I mean, he suffered a very unsuccessful career in Formula One, driving for Alfa Romeo Sauber at the time, not a competitive team at all. So he comes over to IndyCar, and he's had, you know, a fair amount of success in IndyCar, but, you know, winning the 500, I mean, that is legacy defining, it's career defining. Like everything else after that is, you know, there might not be one single race in the world you can win that solidifies your place in the history of motorsport and in the pantheon of great motor racing drivers like the 500. I mean, winning the the Daytona 500 is not enough. It is. No. In stock car racing, it's even becoming not enough, because it's to the point with the next gen NASCAR vehicle, and kind of has been on super speedway racing for a lot of years. It can be such a fluke thing when Ricky Stenhouse's or Michael McDowell's can win the race just as likely as a William Byron or a Kyle Larson or a Joey Logano. Then it's a little more, you know, there's definitely a little bit more luck involved. On the 500 side here with Indy, I mean, I would not be mad if somebody like Palou or McLaughlin got their first win. I mean, yeah, I'm a little sick of Palou, and I don't even dislike the guy. But like I alluded to in a previous episode, it's a Jimmy Johnson thing. It's a Max Verstappen thing. It's, you know, a John Force thing. It's just one of those things where it's like, okay, enough of that guy. Can somebody else please win? So right now, you know, and I know I'm a homer for Penske or whatever, I do like Arrow McLaren a lot on the IndyCar side as well. I not going to say who I think is going to win the race, because clearly I have no idea. But I will tell you, to close out this Indy discussion, I desperately would like to either see a first-time winner that is about to turn their season and their career around. And to me, that's a Scott McLaughlin or a Pato Award. I think Pato's had his heart broken enough times out here. That would certainly make my day to see Pato Award win his first Indy 500. If it's not going to be a feel-good story like that with like a dedicated championship caliber full-time IndyCar driver finally winning a 500, then I would love to see Elio win like his fifth, man. I mean, just for the sheer bonkers craziness of him to be able to come back to the series for just this race, basically, and go out and win an unprecedented fifth. I mean, that's just, the place would melt down, dude.
It would. And, going off of what you're saying, I got to go a little bias and a little homer on this. It's like, okay, got to figure there's Ed Carpenter, a guy who just comes back and runs speedways recently, but now just doing the 500, and a guy like him to come and win it would blow the roof off the place.
Yeah.
And I think if any, obviously AJ Foyt's history at the speedway, if his two cars, either one of them won that race, I think it would blow the roof off the place, because AJ Foyt is a legend in Indy and the history. And if that number 14 car won that race with Santino Ferrucci, I think the place would erupt.
I still don't think you're wrong to be keeping an eye on Malukas. You've been talking up David Malukas this whole season, and
He's been fast this whole month of May, testing in Indy, in practice and qualifying. He's been very fast and consistent. And I think if he stays out of trouble, he could be a sneaky little dark horse. If he can stick around to the end of the race, and if he's in the top 5 with, like 20 to go, he's got a shot. But also Ferrucci, like I said, I know I'm leaning on the Foyt stuff, but Ferrucci has been strong in Indy the last couple of years. And this past year, or this year actually, in practice, they couldn't find the setup. They were at the bottom of the speed chart. Then all of a sudden, miraculously, when qualifying came around, boom, qualified 15th.
Yep.
It's like, okay, they found it. Okay, so it's like he knows what he's doing around this place. I'm telling you, the Foyt cars are a little sneaky, but also too, I got to go the Meyer Shank route with Rosenquist and the Creed car, because he's starting.
Oh yeah, there's that, of course.
Starting way up front. Hopefully he doesn't get caught in the. Which we've discussed, and Kyle, I can't wait to go back and forth via text and message.
Oh, it's gonna be great.
We need to just keep in touch on the when is it going to happen thing. As far as we're pace laps. It's like, okay, lap 4.
We need the 3. Minutes to midnight clock. You know what I mean? Like we start dialing that up into the red when we start to get nervous that it's building up the negative energy on the track.
When is the big one going to happen in turn 1? Lap 1, turn 1. Lap 1, turn 2. Because I really think if it's going to happen in turn 1. That's just my opinion, going off of past experience watching the Indy 500.
Yeah, I want to see where the air's moving around on Sunday, because there was some really like pocketed areas of wind turbulence in 2 and 3 during different days and different times of the day. So, you take a bit of a breath of relief, maybe getting through 1 and 2, and then you're coming down to 3 and 4. And I'm not any high-end sim racer or anything like that. I just have my wheel and seat and pedals and shit that I like to drive on. But I'll tell you, when you race, for me at least, when I race Indianapolis Motor Speedway on one of those, turn 1 makes me the most scared. And I think it's because it feels like the stands are on top of you. The proximity, you've just come between the pagoda and the pit road and the garages, and it just feels like you're in a much tighter turn than you really are. And then you kind of get out of 2, and that feels good. And then getting into 3 feels pretty good. And then 4 starts to feel really nervy with that wall coming back up at you. And I don't know, one feels like kind of a tough one. So you could be right there. It's hard to say, but I think that about covers the bulk of the Indy topics for now. I look forward to doing a follow-up with you after the 500. We'll see how wrong we were. But because motorsports is great at making fools out of people that think they know what's going to happen. But that's why we love it. That having been said, let's touch on Monaco real quick. Formula One. Monaco, of course, is what else can you call it but a qualifying race? So often with Monaco, where you're able to qualify on Saturday has a huge bearing on where you're going to finish on Sunday. And it's a wild one, man. I mean, Saturday is almost more exciting for Monaco than Sunday because while Indy might be the greatest spectacle in racing, I would say Monaco might be the greatest spectacle in racing qualifying because it looks frickin' terrifying whipping a car, especially as big as F1 cars have become and as heavy as they've become. Whipping one of those around through the narrow streets of Monaco, the Principality, as the nice English man on the TV calls it. I'm not afraid at all to say I think that Oscar Piastri has a really great chance of locking out a P1 qualifying position. Verstappen can do it too. In fact, Verstappen probably should have more poles at Monaco if it wasn't for incidents outside of his control, red flagging a lap or throwing a yellow out or something like that. Is the Red Bull going to be the car they need it to be in the slow speed stuff? I don't know. It's hard to say, but they really get to pile on the downforce in Monaco because there's really no concerns about, top speed restriction from aero. But, I would like to see Lando Norris pull something out. He's certainly my favorite driver in Formula One, has been for a real long time. I just don't know if his head's in the right place right now, where Piastri seems like he's the same kind of cold-blooded, killer that Verstappen is. And I think you have to fight fire with fire in F1 right now.
Yeah, and like you said, qualifying is so key with that. It's like, especially the way the track is laid out in Monaco, it's like whenever you qualify, you pretty much, the first lap and the first, the dive bomb to the first turn is going to be, always chaotic. But once they get through that, then it kind of turns into a parade, which kind of sucks, but it's still cool to watch because the track layout in Monaco is so cool to see. The surroundings and the way it's laid out, the boats and the buildings and everything. It's so cool. And I've done a little bit of sim racing and I've ran a little bit on Monaco, and just you catch yourself when you're driving around the course there, you start catching yourself looking around. It's like, oh, this is really nice.
Yeah.
It's like, but it's some of the corners are so tight. And it's like some of them are almost like, like a U-turn it's amazing. Just like you said, it all goes back to qualifying. So once they get rolling off once the green light drops, it's going to, the first, like I said, dive bomb to turn one is what it is. But then once it gets spread out, it'll pretty much be just, okay, we're going to watch this and get us to the Indy 500.
Well, and then it becomes a game for the pit crew. They don't even have a wall to hop over, but I mean, there's, 3, 6, 9, 12. I mean, what is there, 14, 16 people on a car for a pit stop? And that's not even exaggerating. I mean, you've got 3 people per corner just to, run the tire gun, remove a tire, and put a tire on. So, I mean, we need to be seeing 2-second, pit stops from these guys. And it, like what we saw with Valtteri Bottas several years ago when he drove for Mercedes, they had a lug nut, got, this single lug nut design like NASCAR and other sports car racing series use. It must have been cross-threaded going on. So then when they went to take it off at the subsequent pit stop, they could not get it off. It was fused to the hub. I mean,
welded itself. Yeah.
Yeah. They literally had to cut it off back at the factory in England. So, one lug nut. I was going to say like one $5 part. That's probably like a $5,000 lug nut.
Magnesium and all that stuff.
Yeah. Drop in the soundbite from Jurassic Park. We spent no expense. Like that's what this is, So I don't ever like to. It's fun seeing races get won off a pit stop. I hate seeing races get lost on a pit stop, if that makes sense. So we'll see what happens there. I'm optimistic that we probably see a front row of Piastri and Verstappen with probably Norris and somebody like Charles Leclerc, especially being a native, what are they? Oh, gosh darn it. No, they're not Monicans. I can't believe I'm blanking on this. I usually pride myself on being a little more culturally aware than a Monegasque. That's what they are. They're called Monegasques.
Very, very nice.
Very fun. He's a Monegasque. Like, all right. But I think even though the Ferraris are still underperforming for the umpteenth year in a row right now, I think he knows his way around that place. And And now that he's won there, if I'm not mistaken, then, it's going to be extra motivation for him to perform well. I just don't, barring somebody pulling out a crazy miracle lap, I'm just not really thinking of anybody else off the top of my head in the field further back that can probably make a run up front to shock any of those guys at the front. But hey, I'll take 3 or 4 guys competing for pole at Monaco instead of the historical one. It was Verstappen and Hamilton for the longest time, it seemed like.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And then, like you said, like we talked about before, it's like qualifying is going to be the key. And Monaco is such a spectacle. Just so you talk about Indy is like a global event, but Monaco, just imagine the turnout they get every year for that in just the international recognition it gets. Like I said, there's going to be people. I'll be up in the morning watching that with my coffee and I'm going to have to try to go international. So maybe I'll have some tea and scrumpets as say Dumb and Dumber. I'm trying to do something. Maybe have a crepe. Something.
Yeah. Oh my God, we're gonna have so much good food. I'm gonna be like the guy in the Monty Python sketch at the end, just a waffle thin mint. Can't do it. No, I'm gonna be enjoying some great coffee that morning. I'm a bit of a coffee nerd, so shocker there. But then it's gonna take a little bit of coffee and some other substances to make it all the way to the Coke 600 later that evening. So we'll touch on that real quick, NASCAR put on a great show at North Wilkesboro last weekend for the All-Star race. Pretty heated battle near the end between Joey Logano on old tires and Christopher Bell on new tires. I was kind of surprised how long it took Bell to finally get around Logano, but Logano, he might as well be called the Secretary of Defense of NASCAR right now. And he was pretty hot with Bell when he got out of the car. And I have to say, I was like, Joey, you're probably going to feel differently when you watch the video. You guys both raced each other. I was okay with it all. I know who I want to win, and it wasn't necessarily Christopher Bell, but I got nothing against the guy, and I think he drove a brilliant race. So it was exciting. It was good to see some good NASCAR short track racing. They needed 36 cars on the track, not 20. So I'd like to see a points race there someday. But heading into Charlotte, I think there's a lot of momentum with the usual suspects. All the talk is going to be about Kyle Larson trying to do the double. And now's a great time for us to touch on that. We haven't talked a lot about Larson. I think he was 11th in the speed traps on Monday. So, holding his own out there, certainly. I think 2 crashes already in Indy isn't going to affect him too terribly much. He doesn't seem to be afraid to wad shit up very much. He rebounds quick. He's got a chip on his shoulder. I think this is the spiciest Kyle Larson this season that I've seen probably since his, comeback tour with Hendrick after being let go from Ganassi. So he's going to be a reasonable threat in Indy. If he makes it to Charlotte, he's going to be a hell of a threat, I think, in Charlotte. I also think you got guys like, William Byron's. I'm sick of him winning, but he's probably overdue to be back, up winning a race. I think Chase Elliott's got a chance at Charlotte to maybe break back out. I think Ryan Blaney has a great opportunity in Charlotte where he historically runs really well to turn his season around like he did in 2023 during his championship run by getting his first win of the season and locking himself into the playoffs. But Frank, let's talk about Larson for a second. So 1,100 miles of racing potentially ahead of Larson on Sunday. If you're not doing so great at the Indy 500, then it's a pretty easy choice to get on that helicopter, go to the airport, get on that airplane and fly to Charlotte, probably get in another helicopter, go to that racetrack and get in a 4,000 pound stock car and go run for 600 miles. What is he going to do if he's running in the top 10 with 20 laps to go with the 500?
Man, I've heard him say repeatedly that the NASCAR race is his focus, and that's his main concern. So, man, like you said, it's going to be interesting to see what he's going to do if he's leading that thing with 10 to go, or if he's in the top 5 or top 3. Man, that's like we talked about before, man, that Indy 500 win, is a life changer. I don't care what Kyle Larson has done already in his career. You win the Indy 500, that puts you in some pretty tall cotton there. That's That puts you with guys like Foyt, Andretti, Mears, Unser. You win the Indy 500. That's a game changer. So man, I don't know what he's going to do. I think the racer in him is going to want to stay in that car and finish it out. Because how can you not? Because here's the thing: we don't know if this is the last time he's going to try this. Because as last I heard, this was the last of that. The deal was like a X amount of time. Yeah, and this is the last part of it now. So who's to say he's ever going to do it again? Obviously, he probably will, but. And I don't know. It's like this could be his only shot. So if he's leading that thing towards the end, how do you not stay in that car?
I mean, there's 32 other guys in that field that would give their right arm to be in the top 10 with 10 or 20 laps to go with a chance to win with a good car at the 500. I think Larson is such a pure racer that he stays in the car. I mean, they're going to have to
wheelman, full on.
They're going to have to use the kill radio on him to shut him down to make him come in off the track. I mean, is there a high likelihood he wins it? I wouldn't say high. There's a potential. Boy, it would be interesting though. And on the NASCAR side, if you're not up to speed on that, so NASCAR to be championship eligible, which of course right now Larson's eligible in every way. Multiple wins this season, the most wins this season, I think. Plenty of points stockpiled up. Maybe not the most wins, but he's in. He's got plenty of wins. He's got a ton of stage points. Stocked up for playoff points. He's got everything going his way right now, I feel like, this year in Cup. Should he miss the race, they would have to be granted a playoff eligibility waiver from NASCAR because of missing a points race. He would be ineligible to contend for the championship, and they would have to grant him a waiver. And I believe they granted him a waiver last year because of the way things worked out with Charlotte. He wasn't able to start the race, of course, and there was the rain delays and everything, which brings up all the controversy this year about what are you going to do, Kyle? What are you going to do? If I'm NASCAR, I'm in a bit of a pickle right here. I think Fox has dumped way more money and effort into their IndyCar coverage this year than they did their NASCAR coverage. I think the suffer factor with the NASCAR broadcast was pretty rough this year on Fox. And it was very visible. So I almost feel like there's a little bit of, animosity of NASCAR towards IndyCar right now on a couple different levels. I could be overreaching here, but are they going to look at Larson and be like, yeah, well, if you win the 500, it's okay. Like, just get here when you can get here and we'll grant you a waiver. No, like the 600 in the eyes of NASCAR is supposed to be their biggest endurance test of the year. It's longer than the Daytona 500. It's longer than the Southern 500. It's, you know what I mean? Like, it is supposed to be one of the very hardest races and one of the crown jewels in NASCAR. And they don't want their potential multi-time champion showing up late, taking over from Justin Allgaier and finishing the race because he won a race in another series, whether it's the Indy 500 or a high limit sprint car race or whatever. So in my mind, let's just Occam's razor. The simplest explanation is probably the most truthful. If I'm Kyle Larson and I have a chance to win the 500, I'm going to go try and win it. Because as long as there's not rain delays, I can still get out of there and get to Charlotte in time, and none of this conjecture is anything to worry about. If I'm Kyle Larson and I win the 500, well, you know what? I'm going to just try and go get me another Cup championship next year. Then I already got one in the bank. I have Cup Series champion on my fire suit, but now I have Indy 500 champion on my fire suit too. At the end of the day, the days of somebody running the score up to 7 NASCAR championships is probably over with the parity and the changes in the sport. Jimmy Johnson was the last one to figure that out. Might call some of those kind of questionable. But I just don't think we're going to see anybody top that, right? So if you're Larson, what does it matter how many you have, really, if you can bank an Indy 500 win? So we'll see. That's a tough decision to make, but I think he's the pure-hearted racer that's like, I want to win the fucking Indy 500. I'm going to go win the 500, and I'm going to drink the milk, and I'll get on the plane to Charlotte when I can, and then I feel like that puts. I know I'm on a roll here, but like, I think that puts a little bit of the burden on NASCAR, because racing fans the world over are like, this man drives stock cars for a living and he won the Indy 500. This hasn't really ever been done. And you're going to tell him he can't keep contesting your championship because he missed the first stage of Charlotte? That's ridiculous,
Kyle, you made a bunch of great points there, and I'll go back to a buddy of mine, Ron Cap, said one time. He said, the sooner that all of these different motorsports divisions and disciplines can understand that motorsports, it doesn't matter what it is, NASCAR, IndyCar, monster trucks, motorsports needs to band together to make motorsports stronger. And I think what Kyle Larson is doing is making motorsports as a whole stronger. And I think NASCAR and IndyCar, and you can't tell me, and I don't care who they are, you can't tell me that NASCAR is not benefiting from Kyle Larson running the Indy 500. In IndyCar, everybody's benefiting from this because it's going to be the biggest story of the entire day. And
everybody's benefiting. I just think there's a bit of, because NASCAR is still a family-owned business, I think there's a bit of ego at play. There's a bit of ego on NASCAR's part at play.
And if they could set that aside and realize that what he is doing is bigger than NASCAR and IndyCar, because you got to figure there's only a couple guys that have won Daytona and won Indy. It's like AJ Foyt, it's Mario Andretti. There's not too many guys have done that. This guy is transcending the sanctioning bodies. He's bigger than the sanctioning bodies. So they need to be smart enough to realize, hey, you know what? This guy's bigger than what we're doing here. If he can pull this off, he wins this race. All it's going to do is bring the spotlight to NASCAR, because a NASCAR driver won the Indy 500, and then Kyle Larson won the Indy 500, so it makes IndyCar look big, and now he's going to try to go to Charlotte and do the double. It's like, if all it does is just lift up motorsports, if that makes sense, Kyle. All it's doing is making motorsports as a whole stronger, because like I said, it doesn't matter what discipline it is. Motorsports in general, it doesn't matter what discipline or what we're doing. As long as somebody's getting headlines in a motorsport capacity, it is only helping grassroots. It's helping monster trucks. It's helping go-karts. It's helping junior dragsters. It's helping drag racing. It's helping everything. So it's like, if they can just get past all the bullshit, it's it's like all this is doing is helping motorsports, because there's a lot of people, at the grassroots level that have tracks that are by subdivisions now that want to shut these tracks down because it's too loud. It's like, man, if motorsports can just keep building up steam, and a guy like Kyle Larson is going to be the guy that can extend this into the mainstream. Because right now, there's, we grew up with Jeff Gordon and Jimmy Johnson and Dale Earnhardt Sr. and Jr. and all these other guys that were legends and made NASCAR what it is now in the early 90s, mid to late 90s, early 2000s, and made NASCAR a household thing. It's not that anymore. Like, no. If you walk into Walmart and ask somebody, hey, who is Corey LaJoie? They'll be like, what? Who? But but back in '92, you walk into Walmart and say, you know who Ricky Rudd is? Oh, he drives a Tide car. It's like, that's what
we
it
got
was
one of his shirts on the rack over here, and the toys are in the toy section. So no, I got you.
The whole Kyle Larson thing really needs to. I hope he can run both races, and if he can finish both, and if he finishes in the top 5 of the 500, and he goes to Charlotte and finishes second or third or wins it, I think it's an amazing story for motorsports in general.
Yeah. I think, overall, probably the best thing that could happen if you're not Kyle Larson is that you run top 5, top 10 at Indy, finish the race, clean race, jump on that plane, get to Charlotte, and have a good clean night with a good finish there. That's like probably the best story, because then you've just sort of conquered the whole situation. There's going to be insanely high positives, but also some pretty rough negatives potentially if he does somehow win the 500. If he does anything of any consequence at the 500 and then wins the 600, it's still a victory for him. I think the only real losing situation is if he crashes out of either of them, or if the rain screws anything up. So I'm not wishing for any of that. I still want to see a good story happen. I want to see, a guy like him, show just truly how talented he is. I don't know if I would still, I hate when people are like, he's the best race car driver in the world. I'm like, well, there's a few other things he needs to do maybe before you can call him that, because I don't think anybody's the best race car driver in the world right now. You just can't say things like that because everything's so specific and so focused on, what it takes. I mean, Verstappen, never mind the fact that his dad was some kind of an F1 racer. But you know what I mean? That kid was bred to race F1 cars. So Larson's not on that path. I don't think NASCAR's in danger of losing their star in Larson to open wheel racing either, IndyCar racing. That's not what he wants to do. This isn't a Jimmy Johnson thing where he's at the tail end of his career and he's looking for, his next fix, and he thinks because he's a 7-time champion over here that he's going to go show these IndyCar guys over here what's going on, and that was not the case. I think the respect that everybody has for what Larson's doing is really immense. So we'll see what happens. NASCAR racing is probably harder to predict now than it ever has been before in terms of, who can win on any given day. We'll see what happens, but I think it's going to make for a great day. I've had a great night talking racing with you, Frank. This has been really awesome. We warned you on Bottom Dead Center. It's not always going to be monster trucks, but we like to think that you would have ordered a couple extra beers and stayed at the table with us if you were at the pub listening to us bench race here. So any last thoughts you had, Frank, before I close this thing out?
We talked about the Kyle Larson thing, and it's kind of funny is that we never even brought this up, that if the Indy 500 start gets delayed and it's going to bump into the Coke 600, Tony Kanaan is Kyle Larson's backup driver. So there's a chance we could see old TK back out there. If obviously we don't want to see that, but what a story that would be if the Indy 500 gets pushed back, and because if Larson starts the race, they can't just put Tony Kanaan in for him. Yeah. So if it gets pushed back and he's going to miss the start of the 600, Larson's going to go to Charlotte. So
what the hell do we do if Tony Kanaan starts in the Indy 500 and wins? What do you do if you're Kyle Larson? My car just won the race with my backup. Damn it.
With Tony, what a story.
Oh, my God. I wouldn't be mad about that.
Not one bit. I mean, when you hear a place erupt, if Tony Kanaan is in that car and leads a lap, I've been to the Indy 500 when Tony Kanaan drove for AJ Foyt, and he actually led a lap. The place exploded. So I'm telling you, that's a dark horse thing. And also too, the Coke 600, we forgot to mention Jimmy Johnson will be in that race.
Yeah, he'll be back in the fit. And his team, Legacy Motor Club, has showed a lot more speed this year.
Eric Jones, they've been strong here lately, and I think that's a team to watch. And of course, the race being so long, that's a sneaky little race there, especially in Charlotte, the way that track is configured and all that. I might need to keep an eye on the Legacy guys at Charlotte.
I am preparing myself for a full day of mental and physical exhaustion, Frank. That's just all it boils down to. And I can't imagine what these guys are going to go through, but I'm here for it, man.
I can't wait. I mean, we have the weekend off with Hot Wheels, so I'm actually making the trek up to Michigan to visit my family. So I'll be in the Detroit area to watch all this stuff, going to a Tigers game on Saturday. So got the whole weekend laid out. So it's going to be a nice little off weekend before we head off to Baltimore for more Hot Wheels action. So it's going to be a nice little break.
Well, that's awesome. I'm super appreciative you took the time out of your weeknight. We'll do a little bit of an Indy 500 recap. Hopefully, record maybe next week on that. So we'll get to work on this and get it out to you. And we hope everybody's been enjoying our relatively uncut and unfiltered Bottom Dead Center episodes. Man, these are lengthy things for me to edit together. But I tell you what, Frank, I don't know what you hear on your side, but I'm very thankful to all the friends and fans out there that have reached out with their, we're not digestible in small bites, and we know that. But you know what? Just like your favorite pair of work boots, we're here for you when you need us. So
absolutely,
you can't wear your dirty work boots all the time, and you can't listen to us all the time in one shot. We get that, but we're here when you want some monster truck talk or some other goofy talk from us. But a lot of good feedback out there, so we really appreciate it. And shout out to our friends over at the All Monster podcast. I was talking to Travis over there the other day about some topics that they had going going on there, so we might do some crossover guest stuff maybe at some point in the future. You never know. But shout out to those guys doing a good job. Shout out to all our fans on Instagram following us over there, all of our fans on the OSMT YouTube page. We appreciate you liking and subscribing there so you never miss 1 ounce of our awesome OSMT videos and our Bottom Dead Center show. And thank you for your support on the OSMT merch shop. We got some cool designs up there. I'm rocking my Curves Extra Gold Motor Spectacular hat, and we got the tour shirt to go with it with the 1990 tour dates as accurately as shout out Matt Stoltz and Justin Mosinger, two of my finest research buddies in all things OSMT. They helped me out with the 1990 schedule, putting that together. So if you're like me and you saw a show during the 1990 USA Motorsports Curves Extra Gold Motor Spectacular tour, then that has some sentimental value to you. So thanks for all the continued support. We're going to jump off of here. Apologies if this episode wasn't maybe as chock full of videos and pictures and stuff as I normally like to make it, and was a little more of just a straight talk show. But hey, I sling beer full time. I don't get to produce this podcast full time yet. So we'll see. But anyways, take care, everybody out there. Have a fun and safe Memorial Day weekend. Whoever you're with, however you're celebrating it, we hope you have a fun and safe one. Keep all of our service members, past and present, especially those that have given their lives for our country, in mind as we do celebrate this Memorial Day weekend. While Sunday might be about racing, there's heavier topics, especially on Monday, that we always have to keep at heart and keep in mind. That, you know, the folks that have made the sacrifices to let us geek out over stuff like this. So on behalf of the whole Bottom Dead Center and OSMT crew, I'm Kyle. That's Frank. Appreciate you. We'll see you guys for our next episode.